Number 10. Bottomless undies. I think I speak for everyone when I say that putting on a clean, fresh pair of underwear is a nice feeling. Gone is the brown underwear that was once white of yesterday, replaced with fresh, loving linen of today. Now, if you're also like me, then you probably have some underwear with holes in it. I'll throw them out eventually. I'll get around to it. Just wear them a few more times first and then I'll get rid of them. But did you know that some ladies' underwear in the Victorian era had no bottoms? Yeah. Part of the many layers of clothing that women were wearing back then, their underwear had no bottoms, which to me is the whole point of wearing bloomers in the first place. You gotta keep your business warm and packed away. I just don't understand what the point of having it all hang out is. That's just stupid. I don't know. Number 9. No razors. There's a joke about the 70s, George W. Bush, and garden hedges here, but I'm gonna let you fill in the blanks. Basically, this is a time in history where you cannot hop in the whip and drive on over to your local hair razor dealership because there ain't no whips and there ain't no CVS or Shoppers Drug Mart if you're Canadian. Today you can buy disposable razors pretty much anywhere and there's multiple models for doing so. When things get hairy, you got options. Women in the Victorian era were not so lucky. They had to go for the natural look. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just I feel like a girl's gotta have her options. She gotta be able to, do her own thing. Why not? Number 8. The dirty Thames. When you think of Victorian England and the people, there's only really two classes, the wealthy and the ones who are broke and sound like they're from Peaky Blinders, love. Yeah, that's right. However, even for women of high esteem with their bottomless undies and lady maidens growing a flush, the streets of Victorian London weren't very bourgeois, to say the least. Muddy dirt roads, thieves, beggars, and a really bad smell. It just didn't smell very nice. Oh, and also a really scary guy, but we'll get to that in part 1. But perhaps the most disgusting was the Thames River, which after years of treating it the same way Brendan Fraser was treated after the Mummy franchise was over, it wasn't a good look. It was full of filth, sewage, garbage, and animal cadavers, so much so that it was said you could walk across the river on top of them. That is no place for a lady to be. Ooh. Number 7. Calf ear appetizers. This one goes out to all the folks who like their steak well done, as this may be too much to stomach. Given the way food was prepped and handled back then, I would agree with most folks that cooking the devil out of your meat was probably just the safer bet. Sucks for me because I like my steak rare as you can make it. Blue, almost, honestly. I love it like that. I am also willing to bet that most of you folks who like your steak well done aren't a big fan of fat and gristle. I also love fat and gristle. I just like meat, what can I say? What I'm getting to is calf ear appetizers. Yes, cooked calf ears, which I'm pretty sure are just like pure cartilage. Higher class women could often find themselves at parties where they would serve up this chewy delight. You'd probably just be chewing on that for a while. I feel like most people wouldn't like that. Is Chris a cartilage guy? I don't know, we'll see. Number 6. Hand cleavage. This goes for every inch of the skin, really, but women had to cover up back then. That means no ankles, neck, or God forbid a wrist. If a man saw a wrist, they would act, ooh. Well, I don't know if they were that down bad, but women of higher esteem wore gloves. There's etiquette to gloves. It was all part of the culture, which means only women with dosh could practice such glove etiquette. I say no woman should have to cover up. She should wear whatever the heck she wants when the heck she wants to. However, with the gloves, I believe there's a separate issue. I have an issue being a big dude with asthma. I sweat a lot more than the average folk. It just sucks, but if I was a fair lady with those gloves on, well, I might want to leave them on. Wouldn't want to ruin anyone's appetites for calf ear appetizers because the smell and the sweat, it just, it'd be gross,
Number 5. Burke and hair. Medical schools were offering a handsome fee for deceased bodies to study. This is an odd time. So an unhealthy amount of Victorians came up with this new solution. They thought they were brilliant. Yeah, they would rob graves. They would just go and rob the freshest graves they could find. They would wait in the bushes until the funeral's over, and then they would go and disgusting. It got so out of hand that family members were actually guarding the graves of recently deceased overnight. That's how bad it got. That's disgusting. But nobody goes down in history like William Burke and William Hare. They were an unlikely duo, to say the least. They wouldn't wait until the body was done living. You know what I mean? They would actually kill people and rush the process, all for a pretty penny. 16 victims in total between 1827 and 1828. It took 16 victims for people to start catching on to this weird plan. The pair would lure lure victims into their house, fill them with alcohol, and then they would suffocate them. They had a sick system and they would suffocate them because the body needed to be in the best condition possible in order to receive a payout from the Edinburgh University Medical School. So they would, try and keep it as clean as possible, which is horrible to say, but it makes sense. The Anatomy Act in 1832 put an end to this horrific plan. Number 4, bird hats. Look, I don't have much to say about this next one here because, well, alright, yeah. I love a good hat. I've worn a few hats here throughout my time on Bumblebee, some baseball caps, some beanies here and there, sure. I've never worn a dead bird on my hat though, and I don't think that I will. That's for certain. I might just leave that out. Taxidermy was a hot topic back in Victorian London. Folks would rock the dead beaver or bowler hat, any animal they would just prop up there, and it was considered fashion at the time, believe it or not. It was a dangerous trend though long term. Conservationists were saying that 67,000 species of birds were all at risk of extinction due to this crazy dead bird hat craze. Can you imagine just a stuffed seagull on my hat? I'm like, all right, number 5, here we go. It's crazy. Also, that's like a lot of weight, you know what I mean? A lot of weight on your head, just kind of. Oh, sorry, there's just a dead pigeon on my head, so my neck's kind of sore. What if the wings opened up and you kind of just like got some air? Maybe that's why they did it. Number 3, holiday cards. Today, these Hallmark holiday cards, they go way too hard. And they also have a card for everyone and everything, you name it. Birthdays, weddings, stepdad's name day, you're like, what? That's so specific. Like they have everything covered, but back in the 1800s, these holiday cards, they were brand new. Nobody knew what to write or say, so they would just end up sending these artistic sentimental scenes. It would be like a frog in a top hat riding a bike. No caption, just that. You'd be like, hey, Merry Christmas, I guess. It'd be like a carrot with a face. It'd be a haunting image, really, to receive from a loved one on Christmas, but it's the thought that counts, I guess. This holiday season, just give your parents a card with this on it, and then see what they do. Don't even write anything, just stare at them in the corner, all Victorian-like, and be like, Mother, Father, Merry Fortnight Christmas. I don't know what they would say. Number 2, lots of arsenic. We of course have to mention a big problem in the 1800s. Arsenic, everywhere, all at once, okay? Skin lotion, tons of cosmetics, it was a nightmare. Even if you didn't use any facial cream or anything, it was everywhere else. It was in wallpaper, it was in dresses, it was in toys, medicine. My gosh, it really was horrible. It's a nightmare. And it's because arsenic was cheap at the time. It was during the Industrial Revolution. It was being unearthed more and more, and finally, come 1851, the Arsenic Act was passed, which fixed a lot of issues. Yeah, we regulated that one. Not soon enough, but we definitely got that one fast. And finally, number 1, Jack the Ripper. Unidentified to this day. We've got to end on a horrific note. Everybody's just finding out now about Jeffrey Dahmer, it seems. He's a hot topic on Netflix. But what about Jack the Ripper? How did he get away with it this entire time? Why aren't we going to see a Netflix doc on him? Ever. Jack the Ripper was active in the East London neighborhoods, primarily targeting sex workers in the area. Now, at the time, the murders of 5 women from August to November of 1888 were believed to have been connected somehow to Jack the Ripper, although some sources claim that he was active even until 1891. Again, we're never going to know at this point. Many believe Jack the Ripper had some anatomical knowledge due to the way that he left his victims. I can't really say anything else because it's disgusting, but yeah, he knew some things, disgustingly. And while there were some suspects, including a member of the British royal family, believe it or not, Jack the Ripper was still never identified.
In 10th place, we have loss of rights under marriage. Under English common law, a married woman lost her legal independence, she could not enter contracts or sue, and her property and obligations were mostly subsumed by those of her husband, the couple becoming a single legal entity. In less legalese, any property she might have had in her name, be it through a family holdings or being, signed over, became her husband's and not hers the moment she signed her marriage license. Also, any personal property acquired by the wife during the marriage effectively came under the full control of her husband. A married woman was unable to dispose of any property without her husband's consent, and upon divorce, women generally had no rights to any property accumulated during marriage, usually leaving them impoverished. Women were able to retain some property they possessed prior to marriage in certain cases during a divorce. Certain cases. So if your dad gifted you, say, a summer home for safety, and you wanted to divorce your husband and take back that rightfully given home for your new home, good luck getting that back. Besides the dowries, prenuptial agreements effectively allowed married women to maintain beneficial interest in her previously owned or inherited real property, which was placed under trusteeship, allowing her to have a separate income from her husband. Moral of this story, Sign the damn prenup. In ninth place, we have a lack of consent in marriage. So in addition to losing your rights over whatever property you brought into the arrangement, if you are a girl like me, consent and rights over your own body didn't exist. Marriage overrode a woman's right to consent to sexual intercourse with her husband, giving him effective ownership over her body. Honestly, just add it to the dowry list. Insert man's name here is to be gifted however many gold coins, couple of cows, the right to my land, and the rights to do what he pleases with my body. Am I ever glad I live in today's day and age who have the right to look at that and say, absolutely not? Women were expected to have sex with only one man, her husband. Just imagine a husband for me here, okay? On the flip side, it was acceptable for men to have multiple partners in their life. Some husbands had lengthy affairs with other women, while their wives stayed with their husbands because divorce wasn't always an option. But if a woman had sexual contact with another man, she was seen as ruined or fallen and considered to have violated the marriage. Yeah, gotta love a double standard. Victorian literature and art was full of examples of women paying dearly for straying from moral expectations. Adulteresses met tragic ends in novels, including the ones by, great writers such as Tolstoy, Flaubert, or Thomas Hardy, as opposed to the modern possibility of happiness and fulfillment from adultery. While some writers and artists showed sympathy towards women's subjugation to this double standard, some works were didactic and reinforced the cultural norm. In the Victorian era, sex was not discussed openly and honestly. Public discussions of sexual encounters and matters were met with feigned ignorance, embarrassment, and fear. One public opinion of women's sexual desires was that they were not very troubled by sexual urges. Even if women's desires were lurking, sexual experiences came with consequences for women and families. Limiting family sizes resulted in resisting sexual desires, except when a husband had desires which, as a wife, women were contracted to fulfill. To discourage premarital sexual relations, the new Poor Law provided that women bear financial responsibilities for out-of-wedlock pregnancies. In 1834, women were made legally and financially supportive of their illegitimate children. Sexual relations for women could not just be about desire and feelings. This was a luxury reserved for men. The consequences of sexual interactions for women took away the physical desires that women could possess. In 8th place, we have purity culture. The ideal Victorian woman was pure, refined, and modest. Makes me gag to say it, but here goes nothing. This ideal was supported by etiquette and manners. The etiquette extended to the pretension of never acknowledging the use of undergarments, which would be referred to as unmentionables. The discussion of such a topic, it was feared, would gravitate towards unhealthy attention on anatomical details. As one Victorian lady expressed it, "These are not things, my dear, that we speak of. Indeed, we try not even to think of them," in contrast to the modern norms of frank and constant discussion of, details. Pardon me while I'm rolling my eyes here. The pretense of avoiding acknowledgement of anatomical realities met with the embarrassing failure on occasion. For example, in 1859, the Honorable Eleanor Stanley wrote about an incident where the Duchess of Manchester moved too quickly while maneuvering over a stile. Tripping over her large hoop skirt, she went head over heels, landing on her feet with her cage and her whole petticoats above her head. They say there was never such a thing seen, and the other ladies hardly knew whether to be thankful or not that a part of her undergarments consisted in a pair of scarlet tartan knickerbockers, which were revealed to the view of all the world in general, and to the Duke de Malakoff in particular. What a scandal. However, despite the fact that Victorians considered the mention of women's undergarments in mixed company unacceptable, men's entertainment made great comedic material out of the topic of ladies' bloomers, including men's magazines and music hall skits. There's that icky double standard again. In 7th place, we have denial of education. Women were generally expected to marry and perform household and motherly duties, rather than seek formal education. Even women who were not successful in finding husbands were generally expected to remain without university degrees and to take a position as a governess or as a supporter to other members of the family. The outlook for education-seeking women improved when Queen's College in Harley Street, London, was founded in 1848. The goal of this college was to provide governesses with a marketable education, because, gotta have a governess. Later, the Cheltenham Ladies' College and other girls' public schools were founded, increasing educational opportunities for women's education and leading eventually to the development of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies in 1887. I'm great at entertaining the spawn of others, but I promise you all that I'm not someone you want as a mom or a teacher. In 6th place, we have lower pay. Women could not be expected to be paid the same wage as a man for the same work, despite the fact that women were as likely as men to be married and supporting children. In 1906, the government found that the average weekly factory wage for a woman ranged from 11 cents over 3 days to 18 cents over 8 days, whereas a man's average weekly wage was around 25 cents for 9 days. Women were also preferred by many factory owners because they could be more easily induced to undergo severe bodily fatigue than men. Child minding was another necessary expense for many women working in factories. Pregnant women worked up until the day they gave birth and returned to work as soon as they were physically able. In 1891, a law was passed requiring women to take 4 weeks away from the factory work after giving birth, but many women could not afford this unpaid leave and the law remained unenforced. This point as a whole is still, sadly, a reality in our modern day. Many women don't make the same as men for the same jobs and are expected to do more for less.
Number 5. Hand stitchers. Yeah, this one's not as stinky, sure, when you think of these jobs, but it still sucked. With the rise of industrialization, many garments and household items were still hand sewn. Hand stitchers, again, often young women, they would sew clothing, linens, and other products using needles and thread. They worked in tight factories, overcrowded workshops, or sometimes in their own homes, often under poor conditions and for low wages, really low wages. The demand for hand-stitched goods remained high as mass production techniques weren't widespread yet. It was close, but once sewing machines came into the picture, yeah, it eventually led to the decline of hand stitchers, which is good, right? I don't know, I'm torn because part of me is like, awesome, they don't have to do that by hand anymore. Then I'm like, their only job was replaced by machines. So I'm like, I don't know, I really don't know this one. Number 4, bone grubbers. Again, sounds like it's gonna suck just from the name. A bone grubber? What does that do? Bone grubbers were these individuals who scavenged animal bones for various purposes. They liked all the bones. That's all I'll say. They loved any and all bones. You can figure it out. They collected bones from landfills, battlefields, and even graveyards. These bones were used for making fertilizer, bone meal, bone utensils, fancy. I'm gonna grab my bone fork. Cheers. And even crafting tools. Bone grubbers worked in poor conditions and faced controversy for their activities because, you know, they would steal bones from fresh graves, so more than fair, I'd say. As regulations on waste management in graveyards tightened, the practice of bone grubbing declined and hopefully disappeared forever because stop stealing my aunt's femur. Get out of here. Number 3, chimney sweeps. These ones were horrible. This one really sucked. I'll say what I can here without breaking YouTube guidelines, but yeah, these lads here, these chimney sweeps, they were younger gentlemen. As homes and factories heavily relied on coal for heating and manufacturing, chimneys became clogged with debris more and more every day. It's looking yucky up there. Now, instead of an old man who's broken, they would send in these, again, young lads, quite young lads. All I'll say. The shorter the better, right? Get them up there. Chimney sweeps would climb up narrow and dark chimneys using brushes and scrapers to remove all this horrible buildup. It was really not a fun time. Yeah, that's really all I can say about it. The work was dangerous, it exposed them to toxic fumes, and the risk of getting stuck or falling, well, that surely didn't help. Eventually, thanks to public outcry and legislation, this job disappeared in the late 19th century. Although I remember cleaning my chimney when I was younger. I'm gonna call my dad after this list. Number 2, a tosher. Being afraid of rats and the dark, well, this is quite impressive to look back on. A tosher was a person who ventured into the dark and filthy underground sewer system in search of valuable items. Anything, really. I mean, we're down here, anything good. Anything that's not soft, we'll take it. Toshers would navigate the labyrinth tunnels armed with a long pole with a hook in hopes to retrieve anything of worth. Coins, discarded jewelry, again, pretty much any other valuable objects that may have been accidentally dropped or washed away. Now they have it. Now they often faced harsh, well, rather disgusting conditions, like for example, tons of human that's definitely down there for sure, toxic gases, disease-ridden water, tons of rats, more human and given the era, there was a risk of collapsing tunnels all around you. So really the worst job you could think of in the Victorian era. Toshers relied on this hazardous occupation as a means of survival. It was all they got. Whatever you lost was all they had to live off. So what a terrible era, horrible job. And finally, number 1. During the Victorian era, grave robbers emerged, just all of them out of nowhere. They're like, yes, with their shovels, due to the high demand in medical research, okay? You give someone a body, they give you some money. That's all they had back then. No paperwork, in and out, boom. With a limited legal supply, these individuals resorted to stealing freshly buried corpses, targeting the graves of the poor and marginalized. Yeah, history's so scary, so disgusting. Armed with shovels, again, just coming out of the bushes with their shovels in hand, with their weird, I don't know, who does this? They operated at night, of course, employing various techniques to avoid detection. Obviously, they did this like they were Batman. They didn't want to get caught because that's a little illegal. The stolen bodies were then sold to medical schools and private lecturers. Public outrage led to the Autonomy Act of 1832. Thank God this was passed. This is a really fun one here. This legalized the donation of unclaimed bodies to medical institutions and reduced the need for grave robbery and established a regulated source of supplies. Instead of dudes just finding finding random people buried in random places and then bringing them in. I'm glad we got rid of that. That's good. I thought dissecting a frog in science, I thought that was weird, but where'd those frogs come from? You know what I mean?
In 10th place, we have deadly party games. So back in the day, board games weren't the massive industry they are today, and Victorians loved their parlor games, even more so when they risked their lives doing it, because, why not? One such game was called Snapdragon and involved pouring raisins into a bowl, soaking them in rum, and setting them on fire before scrambling to remove as many raisins as possible and chomp them down while they were still aflame, because, why not? Another game was called Hot Cockles, and I couldn't make all of this up if I tried. Blindfolded and with your head in someone's lap, partygoers would take turns kicking you in the rear end, and then you had to guess who it was that kicked you. This sounds not only uncomfortable from the start, but like it could quickly get out of hand, and my tailbone hurts thinking about it. Yet another game was called Cellar Stairs and involved walking backwards down a flight of stairs using a handheld mirror as your only guide. Supposedly the features of your future mate would appear in the mirror, but it seems more likely that you would just, fall down the stairs, and I know I would've. My balance is not the best. Finally, there's the Candle and Apple game, sometimes called Snap Apple. The game was so popular in the 18th and 19th centuries that Halloween was often referred to as Snap Apple Night. Candles and apples would be hung from the ceiling, and the goal is to get a bite of the apple without consuming any wax or getting burned. As a former altar girl who used to play with wax, youch! I can't imagine just how much that would hurt my face. Also, I think I found where Ready or Not got its inspiration. In 9th place, we have hats made from taxidermied birds. Not gonna lie, I'm not the biggest fan of taxidermy, even though I have a friend who has a museum in his home that has more than a few pieces. Granted, he mostly focuses on albino taxidermy. But hey, to each their own. What began as a few plumes from herons, jays, and pheasants tucked into the brims of headwear became a wildly popular trend which the fashion industry capitalized on by going to the extreme, adding entire taxidermy birds to very tall hats as well as stuffed hummingbirds to decorative hand fans. According to the Victorianist, millinery fashion took a truly bizarre turn in the 1880s, when hat crowns grew tall, offering a generous display area for, in the most extreme examples, an extraordinary array of animals including cats and squirrels. I don't even want to imagine the amount of flies that would be circling, around hats. That was still a trend in today's world. How warm things are thanks to global warming. Also, I worry for neck health since I doubt those hats were very light, and as someone who has worn a couple of very heavy wigs in my lifetime, they tend to take a toll. In 8th place, we have Victorian death photographs. So photographs of loved ones taken after they died may seem kind of morbid by today's standards, but in Victorian England, they were a way of commemorating the dead and blunting the sharpness of grief. Remember, unless you were rich enough to have a painting commissioned, there really wasn't a way to preserve visual proof that someone existed and how they looked for future generations. In images that are both unsettling and strangely, fitting, families poise with the dead, and consumptive young ladies elegantly recline, the disease not only taking their life, but, increasing their beauty. Victorian life was full of death. Epidemics such as diphtheria, typhus, and cholera scarred the country, and from 1861 onwards, the bereaved queen made mourning fashionable. Trinkets of memento mori, meaning remember you must die, took several forms and existed long before Victorian times. Long exposures when taking photographs meant that the dead were often seen more sharply than the slightly blurred living, because of their lack of movement. On some occasions, eyes would be painted onto the photograph after it was developed, which was meant to make the deceased more lifelike, while other times death was a lot more obvious. Locks of hair cut from the dead were arranged and worn in lockets and rings. Death masks were created in wax, and the images and symbols of death appeared in paintings and sculptures. But in the mid-1800s, photography was becoming increasingly popular and affordable, leading to memento mori photographic portraiture. Try saying that 5 times fast. The first successful form of photography, the daguerreotype, was an expensive luxury, but not nearly as costly as having a portrait painted, which, like I said before, that was the only way you could do it first. As the number of photographers increased, the cost of daguerreotypes fell. Less costly procedures were introduced in the 1850s, such as using thin metal, glass, or paper rather than silver. Pricey silver. In 7th place, we have uses for arsenic. Pardon me, uses other than ending lives. But that also makes me want to consider a top 10 creative ways to dispose of people. Worth a ponder. Arsenic invaded almost every aspect of life in 19th century Britain, leaving a toll of death and illness. A byproduct of an emerging smelting industry, arsenic was cheap and readily available as rat killer by the early 1800s. It was also odorless and tasteless, and easily confused with flour or sugar or other cooking essentials. By the mid-1830s, morbid descriptions of death from arsenic terrified the public and became a staple of the British popular press. But most of the fatalities from arsenic were more pedestrian, from accidental use in food or from exposure to arsenical compounds in consumer goods such as fabric dyes and wallpapers, in facilities that made these products, and in the polluted air. Arsenic was used even in medications to treat everything from asthma and cancer to reduce libido and skin problems. Now, Victorians were just as obsessed with their bodies as we are, if not more dangerously. Many women used arsenic to fight wrinkles, and men swallowed arsenic tablets as kind of a pre-Pfizer Viagra. It's unclear if arsenic can actually be used to turn compasses to true north, but it doesn't seem advisable to try it. I feel like there are much safer ways to get a motor running, if you will. In 6th place, we have wasp waists. We all know that corsets were a thing in the Victorian era, but they were much more extreme than most people might think. Many women cinched themselves down until they had very tiny wasp waists. With super snug corsets that didn't just rearrange your insides, they made it impossible to breathe. Now, before anyone starts calling all corsets or stays awful to wear, they're only bad for your health if you're trying to accomplish the above improperly. As a gal who corsets often for fashion and posture purposes, I've only ever experienced discomfort when they weren't properly fitted, like when I was wearing them for too long, or when I was wearing the combination of a too small steel-boned one outdoors in the cold for too long. But this is a do as I say and not as I do kind of situation, since that was like a one-time thing and my ribs have very much learned their lesson. Long story short, corsets are not bad, you just have to wear them properly. You trust me, right?
Number 5. Cat attacks. If I had to pick, I would of course say I'm 100% a dog person. I'm sorry, I grew up with 2 cats, I'm allergic. I grew up with 2 dogs, not allergic. Dog guy all the way, sorry. Cats are cool, but this next story just totally freaked me out. Back in 1870, this rich woman had put her time, energy, and resources into cat breeding. How lovely is that? She had tons of cats, she loved all of them, and they loved her. Again, I'm allergic, so I'm already sneezing just reading about this story. It was the 1800s, okay? A lot of candles, everything was obviously extremely flammable, and disaster hit often in Victorian times. And in 1870, a fire broke out at this young woman's home. The cats were trapped inside the house. Now, they made it outside, don't freak out or anything, they all made it out, but by the time the 2 maids had kicked the door open to rescue said cats, they had gone full primal. They were afraid, they were freaking out, they were just scratching their way out through anyone and everything. The fire in the house had obviously scared them, so when the doors were open, these 2 maids were both sadly attacked by all of these cats. What a horrible thank you for saving all of their lives. I pulled my cat's tail when I was younger. I learned real quick never to do that ever again. Number 4, hiccups. Today we have many cures for hiccups. Yeah, you gotta get scared or hold your breath or drink water like while you're doing a handstand. I don't know, everyone's got weird ideas, whatever. But nothing was as dangerous as the Victorian era hiccup cure. Yeah, ready for this one? Don't try it. This one's scarier than a jump scare, that's for sure. In 1899, again in the good old Merck medical manual, it recommended using chloroform to cure your hiccups. Yeah, just completely damage your entire nervous system and poison your kidneys, for sure. To get rid of hiccups, that's way better. This 19th century anesthetic was not a solution. Never try this. Continue scaring your family and friends. That's definitely the way we handle hiccups now. Number 3, tapeworms. Back in the Victorian times, they really figured out the trick to weight loss. Yeah, was it watching what you eat, maybe counting your steps, maybe getting a gym membership, something like that? Nope, and no way. No, it was way easier than all those things combined. Can you believe that? And you didn't even have to pull back on how much you were consuming. Doesn't this sound fascinating? What is this? Well, all you needed was a handy tapeworm. Yep, I don't have one. I don't know why I pointed. That'd be gross if I had one. Yeah, tapeworm. You know those things that can kill you today if you get one? See, the plan was if you eat a tapeworm egg, okay, it will later hatch in your stomach, and at that point you could just eat anything you wanted. Because every time you ate, the tapeworm would also eat, so you could get your snack on while still rocking those Victorian skinny jeans, right? Tapeworm cyst pills, or go for a jog. Your call. Number 2, Victoria's reign. Queen Victoria's reign started in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death later on in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was 5th in line when she was born, so right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever get the crown. Then one by one, out of nowhere, all of her family members began passing away suddenly. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and grandfather both died a week apart from each other. So by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next in line for the throne. That's how fast it happens. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough, Victoria was brought up under the Kensington system, which if you haven't heard of before, it's pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, she created this Kensington system to control her daughter. She literally isolated the child from mates or family members, anything fun or social, you name it. Her mother did this to keep her pure, of course, to keep her the most pure lady. This system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every action, including who she can see or speak to. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up. That's it. I'm like, hey, me too. She had her half-sister, Princess Fedora of Leamington, and the Duchess attendant Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoire. I mean, only 3 friends growing up, that's cruel. She shared a room with her mother until she was finally queen. Yeah, she couldn't walk down the hallway alone at any point. She had to always walk with her mother by her side, even to the washroom. That's crazy. Victoria has reflected on her childhood since, and yeah, she hates John Conroy for manipulating her mother, and she actually refers to him as Demon Incarnate, so that's good. It's a nice nickname. Incarnate? He's a demon. He's the worst. Let's just call him that. And finally, number 1, royal enemies. Being the queen and all, a security team is of course needed at all times. And during her reign, there were multiple attempts to harm the young Queen Victoria. The first attack was back in 1840. It was a young guy named Edward Oxford, and he attacked the Queen's carriage. Just ran at it like a crazy guy. Obviously, and thankfully, nothing happened. But when Edward was later accused of high treason, he was actually found not guilty due to insanity. Then a couple years later, in 1842, it happened again, but this time it was 2 men attacking the carriage. And then in 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, ran up and hit the carriage with his cane. He was going nuts as well. Everyone wants this carriage. This is like the ultimate, no one's getting through this carriage apparently. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook after all these events. Then again in 1842, 1849, 1872, attempt after attempt, it was horrifying. But then things got a little worse with a man named Boyd Jones. Yeah, this guy stalked the Queen from 1838 until 1841. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once. He knew a way in just to Buckingham Palace, which should never be a thing in the first place. And the weird part is here, Boyd Jones, once he was inside the palace, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, and he would also just sit on her throne for hours, just hanging out. Yeah, he would pretend he's Cersei Lannister and just sit on the throne for a minute or two. Think about life. Eventually, thankfully, he got caught, but imagine coming home and Boyd Jones is sitting on your couch. You're like, what are you doing? Take that shirt off, get out of here. Number 10, mudlarks. Victorian London, around the 1840s, it was a bit of a mess. Yeah, a lot of sore throats, that's for sure. Everybody was sick all the time, and the jobs that were available certainly did not help the cause. The jobs that were available had you catching rats and crawling into sewers. One of the worst jobs to have was that of a mudlark. As their name hints towards, a mudlark involved getting in deep in the muck that builds up alongside the Thames River. This one was reserved for younger folks, obviously, because it was like working in quicksand. If you were older, you would just get trapped. It was pretty sad. It was also exhausting, not to mention the chances of being washed away by the river were pretty high. All for the slim chance of finding a pocket watch, driftwood, rags, anything really worth your troubles. Number 9, chimney sweep. I remember when I was younger, I had to sweep the chimney in the house every now and then, whatever, and I loved it. You know, I thought I was the father of the house for a bit, getting in the chimney, getting all dirty and stuff, doing this, my hands on my waist. I don't know, that's what a man was when I was younger. That little broom too, I loved that little broom. I remember when I would do this, my grandmother, who is very English, she would be shook. She would watch the entire time. She would be taken back into time. Because this was a terrible job to have in Victorian London. Yeah, it was not the same at all. Chimney sweeps were famously young. I can't say anything else there in regards, but yeah, they were wee lads, to say the least. History is horrible. 1840 was a good year, all things considered, because a law was passed that then made it illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to climb in and then clean a chimney. Thank God. I'm glad that stopped. I was 18 cleaning my chimney. I had no idea I could have used this great law. Been like, actually, mother, a lot of claws. Number 8, funeral mute. Funerals suck, man. I was a pallbearer like 3 times before the age of 21. My one arm is just strong as now, that's it. I can lift anything just with one arm. I thought being a pallbearer had a lot of pressure, right? Victorian London saw many funeral mutes. Oliver Twist, one of those lousy jobs in that tale, was that of a funeral mute. Funeral mutes were required to dress in all black with a sash while carrying a long cloth-covered stick, and your job would essentially be to stand and mourn silently at the door of the recently deceased home. Yeah, guy dies of a plague and you're like standing there like holding your breath, like great, this is the worst job ever. You would then lead the coffin to the graveyard, so a lot of responsibility. Yeah, don't trip or breathe. Number 7, toilet troubles. Now, the Victorian era was unsanitary, to say the least, but it was also dangerous in ways that you wouldn't expect, right? Go to the bathroom and may not come out. One of the greatest Victorian inventions was that of the bathroom, but it took a few tries to figure out the whole, methane gas problem. We gotta really deal with that one first and foremost. Spontaneous combustion of the bathroom was weirdly common. This is every time you take a shit, you were worried that you might just woo! It was horrible. That's so scary. Flammable gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide, they would build up over time with human waste. A lot of human waste. Built up in the sewers and then eventually would back up into your homes. Next thing you know, you're lighting a candle and your bathroom's gone. Just like that. Now we have poopery. You know what that is? You ever see a little spray? After you go, you hide what you've done with one little spray at your friend's house. It's fascinating how far we've come. Number 6, stairs. Yeah, believe it or not, stairs were a common danger in Victorian times. I'm somebody personally who falls up and down stairs a lot. I'm 6'2". I'm lanky as shit. I have like a Gumby body. I walk around like Woody. I'm always falling up and down stuff. It's horrible. Especially in Canada. It's so slippery. I'm always slipping all the time. In Victorian times, I would have been doomed. Houses were thrown up comedically fast. There wasn't a Mike Holmes on Homes to come in and check it out. There wasn't a building inspector that made things, safe. Servant staircases, they were tiny. They were out of sight. They were built into these narrow walls, often missing steps if they had to, and cut corners just to, be narrow and out of the way. That plus a tray of hot soup and a lot of clothing, yeah, it was next to impossible to move around without something happening. A lot of fatalities in staircases. Even today, around 12,000 people die each year falling downstairs. Hold on to that railing. I'm here to remind you to hold on to that railing. It's crazy. There's actually no stairs there. I just made that whole thing up. Hit that like button for magic. Number 5. Automatic smoking machines. When I read about this, I actually laughed my ass off for like a minute straight. I get some of these inventions, or where these inventions were trying to go. Like an indoor saddle, sure, that's fun, I guess, if you want it to be. The mask at the time was thought to have beauty benefits. The automatic smoking machine was all bad. I don't see any good thing about this thing. It's not even designed well. It looks like shit in the corner. It was just a machine that smoked all of your cigarettes. Yeah, it smoked them automatically and then blew the smoke all over your curtains. What a great invention. Nice, 10 out of 10. Gotta review that. What a perfect addition to the family. This thing, first of all, was not small. It was not petite. It looked like a saw trap placed in the corner. It was so Victorian and scary looking. There's gears and pulleys and there's smoke pluming out at random places. It's like having a choo-choo train in your house. Who wants this? A choo-choo train that gave you lung cancer. Nice, score. Merry Christmas. Yeah, fire it up. It only takes 80 cigarettes at a time. I know. Number 4, the surprise chair. Are you tired of sitting down on chairs that, stay still and don't immediately topple back once you apply any amount of pressure? Well, don't I have just the thing for you? Here we go. The surprise Victorian chair. I guess it was invented for laughs in a world before Netflix. Sure, I guess you have to be creative. There's no sign of practicality in this patent, so we're gonna go ahead and assume that these 1800s folks, they were hilarious. They loved a practical gag. I'm not even gonna say prank. Don't even make me say prank, YouTube. Not saying the P word. The patent shows the exact science here and what it takes to surprise your guest and then have them topple to the ground. I go, ah ha ha, then you bring them back up and then give them the real chair. This is a prank gift, and if we've learned anything in time, getting prank gifts, it only works once. So once you get your pal to take a topple in the 1800s, you would then have to store this heavy, antique, horrible looking heavy chair somewhere in your home and then bring the real chair back. Again, it sounds like way too much effort for a very low payoff. Imagine that, 400-pound chair. They're like, gotcha. All right. Who next? Number 3, toilet troubles. Now, the Victorian era, it was unsanitary to say the least, sure, but it was also dangerous in ways that you wouldn't expect. Some random poo-poo signs coming out of you. One of the greatest Victorian inventions was the bathroom. I love this one, it's great. Now, it took a few tries to figure out the whole methane gas problem, but we did it. Yeah, spontaneous combustion of the bathroom was weirdly common in the V era. Flammable gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide, well, they built up over time with human waste, and more human waste, and just, so much and gases. It built up in the sewers and eventually it backed up into our homes. Next thing you know, you're lighting a candle and then your bathroom's gone and you're gone and there's shit everywhere and it's the Victorian era and you're like, what do I even do right now? What just happened? What science was that? Number 2, the wave rockin' bath. Seaside at home, let's do it. Are you tired of regular bathtubs that are stationary, relaxing, and don't soak your entire floor in minutes? Well, the Niagara wave rockin' bath washes all that away. Yep, see you later. This bathtub was designed to rock, literally. It kept your blood in active circulation, apparently, and it only required 3 pails of water. Also bull. The patent promised the fullest illusion of a sea or a river bath, whilst promising absolutely no water will splash on the floor. Yeah, good joke. No way that's gonna happen. And it didn't happen because that's way too good to work out. Imagine having this now growing up. Are you kidding me? My mom would be yelling at me to clean up the floor immediately. I already made enough splashes with just a stationary bathtub. I don't want a rocking bathtub. I'm trying to rinse my hair. I'm like, this sucks. Shit everywhere. It's so stupid. Just doing this is so stupid. Looking at lights. Finally, number 1, beauty patches. Oh, we need to bring back beauty patches ASAP. Imagine me right now doing this list with an 800s beauty patch. You'd hit that thumbs up immediately. You'd be like, this Victorian man is straight out of time. These patches came in all shapes and sizes. Now, even in this portrait from 1755, quite a ways ago, Joshua Reynolds painted Charles, the 9th Lord Cathcart, rocking a large beauty patch. These beauty patches go way back. Also, look at him. That's a lord right there with that. He's confident. Got one of those, he's great. Beauty patches in the 1800s, they were small, tiny circles, sometimes even hearts or stars, that's pretty fun, you go. Now the reason for these patches, and sometimes having more than one, is because they were commonly used to cover up smallpox scars. Yeah, we found out your secret, you Victorian era gentlemen. They were made out of silk velvet and they were applied with glue, so if you pick a spot, you better be confident. The patches were dark black and they were also meant to make your pale skin pop, which again, imagine if I had one right now, you'd be blind. I'm so pale as is already. If I put one of those patches on, wouldn't be able to see the screen. You turn that brightness down real quick. The position of these patches could also determine your political allegiance. Historian Joseph Addison took note of these positions when observing 2 political parties from back in the 1800s. One party had beauty patches on the right side of their face, while the other side had the opposite. Today we have Twitter. Yeah, usually you can tell someone's political allegiance by just taking a glimpse of that. You're like, oh dear, no, we don't want to talk to that guy. He's a right patch kind of guy. Number 10, rope makers. My arms are tired just thinking of this one already. Here we go. The Victorian era saw physically demanding work, especially, of course, in rope making factories. Today they have machines spin and get everything done in 6 seconds. Back then, you had to do it by hand. Their job involved the process of twisting these fibers again by hand, typically hemp or other materials, into these ropes using large manual machines. Now these workers would feed the fibers into the spinning machines, which required quite a tremendous amount of strength and stamina to operate these things in the first place. Then the repetitive motion of twisting the fibers into ropes, this took hours. This took tolls on their bodies, and of course this often led to strained or pulled muscles. It's like a tug of war, but that's your job forever. That's a nightmare. The job required precision and skill to ensure the ropes were properly formed and durable, because the town's construction sites were relying on these ropes to work. Nobody wants a lousy rope. I'm going rock climbing this weekend and I'm gonna think of lousy rope when I'm at the top. Get all shaky. Number 9, asylum attendants. When the dancing plague happened, back then, city officials didn't call in medical experts, but instead they called in a band to play music while these convulsing victims danced. So when we think of mental health and how it was treated back in Victorian times and history, it's not so friendly, right? Not so comforting, that's for sure. Asylum assistants, okay, this was a job. They were responsible for managing individuals with mental illnesses, some of whom displayed violent or unpredictable behaviors. However, these attendants lacked proper support and training, which left them ill-equipped to handle such challenging circumstances. And in results, it was all bad. The attendants faced physical and emotional dangers, enduring aggressive outbursts, attacks, and the lack of training arguably made these distressing and unpredictable situations way worse. Asylum attendants were like, hey, stop, what are you doing? It's like, that doesn't help. That's not how we do things. These attendants also worked long hours in overcrowded and understaffed facilities, making their job mentally and physically draining. The conditions they faced highlight the significant shortcomings and neglect in mental health care during the Victorian era. Yeah, they called them like mental asylums. They're like, can we change this up? Why is it so scary? Number 8, matchstick dippers. Just sounds dangerous right off the hop. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why matchsticks are this big all of a sudden. Matchstick dippers. Just sounds dangerous right off the hop. Dipping a matchstick, what's gonna happen here? Matchstick dippers, these folks would often dip wooden sticks into a mixture of phosphorus and other chemicals to create matches. Someone's gotta do it, and back then they did it in a very dangerous way. Process of coating the sticks in the phosphorus mixture exposed workers to toxic fumes and harmful substances. Prolonged exposure to phosphorus led to a condition known as phossy jaw, which caused excruciating pain and disfigurement of the jawbone. Phossy jaw. They should make it sound less fun maybe, I don't know. Matchstick dippers predominantly predominantly young women, suffered from serious health issues, including bone deterioration and necrosis. Furthermore, the work environment was loaded with fire hazards, of course, as phosphorus is highly flammable, science. The combination of toxic substances, long working hours, and the risk of factory fires every minute of every day made matchstick dipping a very dangerous, life-threatening occupation during this time. Even now, I'm like, I don't want to be anywhere near any phosphorus. Thank you. Number 7, crossing sweepers. Back in the Victorian era, crossing sweepers were these individuals who earned a living by sweeping and clearing the streets for pedestrians to cross, right? Today we have the big scary thing with wheels, the big scary Decepticon looking truck that goes by and blows debris into your eyes with the spinning brushes. In the olden days, that was done by hand, just one dude. Streets during this time were often dirty and filled with mud, horse and other debris, just everything bad was on the streets. Crossing sweepers used brooms and brushes to create a clear path. And in return, they would ask you for a small tip or payment from those who used their services. They're like, here, I cleared literal for you. How about $1? Thanks. They were especially common in urban areas where foot traffic was high, like downtown. Crossing sweepers were quite young. They were, you know, really young, if I can say that, if you get where I'm going there. And they relied on filthy streets as a mean to survive. So what a horrible scenario. Number 6, human alarm clocks. Halfway through, we'll get a little fun, then we'll get back to the weird stuff. Human alarm clocks, also known as knocker-ups or knocker-uppers, which sounds a little different nowadays, so we'll go with human alarm clock. One of the weirdest jobs ever. I kind of wish this was still a thing. I don't know, I'd apply in a heartbeat. Knockers, knocker-ups, these guys, they single-handedly provided a unique wake-up service during the Victorian era for phones and clocks and all that helpful stuff. Before the widespread availability of alarm clocks, especially among the working class, everybody who had places to be, well, a knocker-up has your back. He'd come and smack your window 6 times and then run off into the woods. What a great job. I kind of want this job. They would use long sticks or poles, whatever, just to tap your bedroom windows. Tap your windows and scare you awake. That often works. Shoot out of bed every morning. That's great. Think someone's breaking into your house. These individuals were typically paid a small fee for their services, which is wild considering what they're doing. Knocker-ups played a crucial role in the industrial areas. With the rise of affordable alarm clocks, the need for these guys sadly disappeared. But you know what? Let's bring it back. Let's get rid of alarm clocks. They're all scary. Get these guys to come and tap on your window. Hey, you have work, get up. You're like, thanks sir, please get out.
Number 5, bloomers. Bloomers were one of the first styles of pants women gravitated towards in the Victorian era. They were worn in rebellion of the often unruly skirts of the day, which made it hard to move around and, well, honestly probably do anything. Female cyclists instead preferred to wear bloomers, causing much scandal as people felt it was improper for women to dress so masculinely. How dare you. Basically, bloomers are like more floofy pants is how I would describe them, and people felt that pants should be reserved for men to wear. Even the floofy ones. They were like, women can't have any pants, not even floofy pants. I gotta say, I would totally rock some Victorian era bloomers and be causing all the scandals myself if I were around back then. They definitely look more comfy than pretty much almost everything else women were wearing. The bloomers got their name from a prominent American feminist of the time, Amelia Bloomer, though she herself did not invent them, but she was a person that basically spoke out and was like, why can't women wear pants? Although Amelia Bloomer did fight hard for women's rights, she herself is not someone I believe we should just straight up glorify, to be clear. She also said some pretty terrible things about Native Americans, and she also seemed to be content with civilians taking the law into their own hands and literally hanging people deemed undesirable in their community, so it's a big yikes from me. Number 4, corset. Corsets didn't originate in the Victorian era, but they definitely became iconic in regards to the fashion of that time period. That's because slim waists, they came back into fashion, baby. They also became iconic for the fact that they were causing great damage to the people wearing them. While I too do love to don a corset from time to time, it is important to make sure that you don't push it when you're wearing them, and it's important to remember that this extreme form of shapewear literally has a history of moving people's insides around as a result of wearing them daily or even just regularly. Honestly, even me wearing it every now and then is not good for you. Just corsets aren't good for you. So even just wearing a corset, you know, every now and then, it's not good. Probably shouldn't do it. I probably shouldn't do it, but am I gonna do it? Yeah, probably. And even back in the Victorian era, when they were trending again, we knew that corsets were bad for you. And it made this item quite the risque one, despite it at the time being coveted and widely used by many out there. That was actually like even a topic back then. People were like, should people be wearing these? This seems dangerous. Number 3, flashing. Some ankle. Can't see it on camera. I can't show it to you because it'd be too scandalous. So scandalous. As silly as this sounds now, especially with it being summer right now, as I'm talking about this, a time when being underdressed is really just being comfortable. This was, in fact, a huge thing in the Victorian era. Women were often covered head to toe from the top of the neck all the way down to the ankles. It was common for women to even wear multiple long skirts and stockings in an attempt to just fully cover their legs and ankles. So those who decided to flash a little bit of ankle with their fashion choices, woo! They were considered quite risque. Number 2, hoop skirts. As deadly as they were definitely fashionable during part of the Victorian era. The hoop skirt, also known as caged crinoline, was a type of skirt that was built like a cage. There's various different ones which were made out of different materials, but the idea is it's literally a big hoop cage that you wear and then you put a dress over top of that, or a skirt over top of that. The idea was to add volume to the bottom of your outfit, which would also help to make your waist look even slimmer. Something that was very fashionable back in the day and something still coveted by many in regards to modern beauty standards today. Hoop skirts though were deadly because you would often misjudge the size of your skirt, which could cause all kinds of accidents. Also, many of the materials used to build the hoop skirts and dresses that went over top were very flammable. Many people died from catching fire or getting their skirts caught in machinery or even carriage wheels. So yeah, don't wear a hoop skirt if you have to do anything or be near flames. Or just be alive in the Victorian era because there were open flames like everywhere. Number 1, the one piece. I like that I saved this one for number 1. I didn't realize I was doing that, but I knew. Subconsciously. The one-piece swimsuit created quite the controversy when it came into fashion near the end of the Victorian era, and the really wild thing is it initially pretty much covered almost like your entire body. But, and it's a big but for this era, it was very fitted. So because it hugged the body, as swimwear really should do so that you can, actually swim, it was considered to be quite scandalous. Not only that, but of course the one piece also wanted to maintain your modesty by not having your skirt float up in the water around you, giving everyone potentially a free show. So it was fashioned to be pants, Oh boy, a woman in pants without a skirt? Scandalous. How dare these women try to swim? We didn't say women could swim. Someone put a law so that these women can't swim. Get them out of these swimsuits.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smoky behind. When somebody tells you that you're just blowing smoke, it means that you're lying, okay? You've now been given exaggerated information of sorts. Well, back in the 18th century, they literally had to blow tobacco smoke at your behind. Yeah, weirdest work break ever, I'd say. So why did we perform magician enemas back in the day? What was the deal here? Well, tobacco smoke enemas were used to treat quite a few symptoms, or they thought so, including a common cold. These enemas came in these fancy kits with a fancy rubber tube. It was all fancy because it was an honest medical practice at the time. It was done by legit medical practitioners. This is the funniest part. The idea was that the tobacco smoke could warm up a soon-to-be deceased body. The nicotine would stimulate your adrenal glands, jolting you back into good health. The best health, might we say. And the way they would do it in the mid-1800s was by just blowing smoke and just waiting, seeing what happened. We're figuratively and literally blowing smoke. That's the origin of that saying. Fun fact there. Imagine doing that today. Like, I think I dislocated my shoulder. What do? He's like, one sec. Number 9, alarm clocks. While the medical world was one threat in Victorian times, apparently so was the technological side. Who knew? We obviously didn't have reliable alarm clocks back in the 1800s, obviously, but we did have jobs. So in order to get up on time, lamplighters or knockers would come by and tip you off. Yeah, they would just yell in your window and just alarm. That's how you'd wake up. A man would yell into your window and smack you with a stick. Legend has it, a young man named Sam Wardell, he got a little creative with his wake-up calls. He needed more than a lamplighter at 5 a.m., so he would Tony Stark this alarm clock gadget. He would use wires, a bunch of stones, all that unsafe stuff. Then at a certain time, stones would fall to the ground, of course waking him up, and presumably everyone else in the building. That would be alarming. Well, Christmas Eve 1885, tragedy unfolded. A few friends had come over for a holiday visit, so Sam had to move some furniture around, rightfully so, to make room for, windmills and breakdancing, whatever they did in Victorian Christmas times. The next morning, he forgot to put things back in the small apartment, and the obvious happened. The rocks then fell on him while he was asleep. Yeah, that probably doesn't feel too good. I thought iPhone alarms were jarring. I take back everything I've ever said. Number 8, relaxative. Okay, so right off the bat, the Victorian era was a little messy. I'm sure you've gathered this by now here on Bumblebee. But these messy new illnesses were putting lots of pressure on medical practitioners, so they were desperate for these new treatments. We laugh at Victorian medical treatments, but they tried, okay? They at least tried. They also achieved many medical breakthroughs as well. But when it comes to handling chickenpox in the Victorian era, well, that wasn't one of them. That was not our finest hour. Chickenpox in the Victorian era was being treated by using laxatives. Yeah, let that sink in for a moment. I have chickenpox. What should I do? Well, try some laxatives. Yeah, folks would slam some castor oil and then, ready for this? They would get even more sick. Who would have thought? You thought you were uncomfortable before castor oil. Yeah, chug that, and then now you're even weaker. Now you're dead. Number 7, backed up. Let's say it's the Victorian era and let's say you're constipated, right? It happens, you know? Well, bad ideas will most likely follow, if you didn't already guess that. According to Merck's 1899 medical manual, small amounts of strychnine were prescribed to those who were constipated. Yeah, the strychnos nux vomica was thought to better the gastric functions. Even a small amount of this stuff would attack your respiratory system. You'd contract, you convulse, it's horrible. It would be a painful way to go out. It's much, much worse than being constipated. Any day. I would much rather be constipated than any type of strychnine. Are you kidding me? Number 6, leeches. I grew up with hearing problems. I've been around the block with earaches, ear infections. I had ear tubes numerous times, all that jazz. So I feel really bad for the folks in this next one, okay? I hear you. Pun intended. In the Victorian era, medical practitioners would say to use leeches for your ear infections. That's the number one trick they don't want you to know. There it is. Once they're attached to you, the idea was that they could numb pain while at the same time providing proteins and peptides to its host. So on paper, again, the idea made sense, but the science didn't quite follow, did it? It wasn't entirely hopeless though. Recently in 2004, the FDA reintroduced leeches to the medical world, yeah, because their bite can break up blood clots and induce blood flow. So it's not entirely hopeless. We talked about leech collectors on this channel before, so of course we have to talk about more of the science that they were hoping to achieve with it, right? Also, I worked at a retirement home when I was 16. I thought that job sucked. Imagine being a leech collector? No way.
Number 5, Mary Surratt. I actually didn't know this one, but perhaps maybe our American audience remembers. Some will recall a time when America was divided in twain. After all, a house divided amongst itself cannot stand. A certain top-hatted bearded president did his best to restore the Union. It took a lot of years and lives, but he managed to do it. However, some were still not pleased. One John Wilkes Booth, to be specific, had to ask the president a leaded question, if you catch my drift. Well, after assassinating one of the most beloved presidents in American history, he needed to hide. You gotta hide after that. And Mary Surratt was the woman who'd let him hide. So I think aiding and abetting, as well as harboring the most wanted man in America at the time, counts as scandalous. She also had some other anti-union behavior as well. That's not good. Naughty, naughty, not very nice. Number 4, Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Isn't that nice? Oh boy. Yes, that's right, the late 1800s teenage daughter who maybe perhaps pulled an O.J. Simpson. Nah, we're not sure, I don't know. Maybe she did not sort of brutally unalive her families. No one else was found at the scene, and then she was acquitted. That sounds just like OJ. Which, given how women were treated back in the day, is kind of strange because it just feels like women who are clearly not guilty were punished for stuff they didn't do, and women who are for sure guilty get off free. Her alibi was that she was in the barn when it happened, and then she walked to the house and Mom and Dad, what's going on here? Let me just wash off my bloody shorts here. What? Who did that? What? That's crazy. Number 3, Mary Ann Cotton. Marriage can be tough, sure, but Mary Ann Cotton is the reason today you can't collect on life insurance when your spouse mysteriously, get your finger quotes out, mysteriously passes away. It all started when she predicted the passing of her stepson, and then it happened. That's weird. After that, it was her husband here, and then another husband there, and well, it's starting to get a little fishy, don't you think? Well, once these unexpected passings were looked into, they all had something in common, something in their tummies. Arsenic. Yes, she was getting rid of her husbands and then trying to claim the insurance money. Evil, but ahead of her time, like 50 years ahead of her time. That's insurance fraud. That's interesting. Well, it's also like cold-blooded, calculated. unaliving, you know, but insurance fraud too. Number 2, Tilly Kilmick. Okay, how about a literal psychic who knew when all of our late husbands were going to pass? In the late Victorian era, Tilly Kilmick was first found predicting the passing of scruffy wild dogs in the ghettos of Chicago. It's kind of a weird thing to say, like, yeah, see that dog? That dog's not gonna make it. The dog? No, he's not gonna make it. Anyway, somehow she always knew when they were going to expire. Then it was her late husband of 29 years. That's kind of strange, 29 years, and he ends up, that's weird. After cashing the insurance money, which she got immediately, she started dating immediately, where oblivious man after man kept passing, and very shortly after she married more and more. Well, she was a regular Mary Ann Cotton, to say the least, as she too was using arsenic on her husbands to collect insurance money. She eventually was arrested, and her stipulation for being in prison was that she was not allowed to cook for anyone. I think that's fair. That's good. Don't let her cook. That's a good idea. Number 1, ladies of the evening. Love them, hate them, or spend a lot of money on them in Vegas. That's Las Vegas, baby. The era was defined by them, especially in London. Whoo, baby. I mean, at night you really couldn't walk anywhere without a fair lass daintily waving her hand in hopes of luring in a customer, which wasn't really an issue given that bedroom-related sicknesses were at an all-time high. Syphilis specifically had shockingly high percentage of the population and would make you think twice. Well, it would make us think twice, it would make me think twice, but people back then, they kinda just went for it. Right, is something wrong with you, love? I don't care, let's go anyway.
Number 10, knocker-upper. Alright, sounds a little different than its actual purpose. Hear me out. Alarm clocks, they're not great, right? They suck, no doubt about it. Now take the alarm clock and assign that job to a real-life person. What does that look like? What does that sound like, rather? At 6 a.m. That person is called a knocker-upper. A person employed solely to wake up workers at mills and factories on those early morning shifts. Now, going from house to house using a long pole to knock on bedroom windows, that sounds like the best job ever, right? I can't close the list with this one. This is number 10, for sure. It's kind of fun. If you had this job, well, you're probably not alive anymore. I don't know, unless you live in a weird town. The people at the time were a lot friendlier back then than they are now, so, you know, I'm sure the knocker-upper came around today. Be a little different. They'd probably be on World Star the next day. Knocker-uppers back in the day, thank you. Thank you so much for waking me up. I would have lost $14. Thank you. It was a big deal. It was definitely a big deal. Number 9. The linkerman. Before the introduction of gas lights on the streets of London, if you were traveling alone at night, well, you'd probably get lost. Because, yeah, even London now would get lost, you know what I mean? So that's where a linkerman would ideally come into play. They'd come in to save your night. What they would do is they would carry with them a torch to help guide your way home. They'd be like, hey, follow me, I know these streets, and then you do it, I guess. It's a little scary. At the end of this impromptu tour, they'd of course expect a little tip from you. Of course, thank you for lighting my path and getting me home. Cheers. Here's 1 nickel. It's actually a lot back then. Here's 1 penny. There we go. They weren't so bad. They were generally pretty helpful in getting you from point A to B, whilst also being able to see 1 foot in front of the other. That doesn't hurt, especially in Victorian London. You get to step on a dirty rat. That'll be gross. It's like a friend walking you home, only you don't know them. And it's the Victorian era, so probably pretty unsafe. 50-50 if you're gonna make it. And their charge was usually 1 farthing or the equivalent of a quarter. The linkerman, like a lot of the jobs on this list, was actually featured in a lot of art and literature from that era. And there were even a couple famous linkermen, famous linkermans, like Lawrence Casey, for example, who was the personal linker boy for the courtesan Betty Careless. Imagine that, your arm must be so strong with that lamp all day. Ooh, it's just like, oh, I can't put it down. Number 8, ghost photography. 1800s ghost photography. Apparently it was a theme or a vibe, I don't know, but there were people that would take the photos of these ghosts. So at one point you would be hired as a professional ghost photographer. On paper, here's your tax returns, that's what I did. The camera, of course, was a hot new invention back then, so tales of ghost and spirit were easily believed, especially when you have a photo of a see-through woman. That probably helps sell your tale for sure. Like, ah, here she is. It's like, that's mom. That's definitely not, you just did that in the back room. I don't believe you. A big name in the ghost game was that of William Thomas Stead. He was born in 1849, so now he's for sure a ghost. Stead was the son of a Congregationalist minister, and at the age of 22, he was appointed as editor of the Northern Echo, which was a regional newspaper in Darlington. Yeah, this British medium, Richard Borsonal, featured a photo of W.T. Stead and a spirit. Imagine that. Imagine a day where somebody was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and they also posed for photo ops with ghosts. Like, can we pick a lane? Science or not? What are we doing here? Number 7, grave designs. Graves, but make them cool, you know? Customize your own pit in the ground. That's fun, that's grim. In the late 1700s, cholera, bacterial infections, pretty much anything floating around your mouth and eyes, it was spreading and it was bad. Not a good thing to ingest. Not an ideal time in history. Many were biting the bullet at this time, of course being gravely ill. But with this came a dark, new, fun trend. Yeah, here we go. The safety coffin. Yeah, let's make your own coffin, DIY. These coffins, God forbid, you were buried alive, while these safety coffins would allow the dead to rise again. Yeah, some Tony Stark guy in the back's like, if you push this, the body will pop back out and come to life. It's like, really? A lot of these coffins were built with extra comfort on the inside and of course a wire, the safety backup wire. This wire ran through the coffin, through the ground, and attached to a bell on the outside on the ground. So if somebody was walking by and they heard a bell ringing beside a gravestone, first of all, it's haunting, well, they know something's up and they can get them out. But folks would get creative with their safety coffins. They would ask the inventor to make them crazy things, like a man named Robert Robinson from Manchester. He had some odd requests. He passed away in 1791, but he instructed his family and watchmen to open the special door on his coffin after he passed. This special door would reveal a layer of glass. Yeah, so if anybody saw any condensation, well, you know he's still alive and get him out. Only he wasn't alive. And now we just have the world's scariest exhibit, just a real life dead man. Let's close that back up forever. I don't want a glass coffin, that's disgusting. Number 6, rat catcher. I mean, obviously you know what's gonna happen with the name the rat catcher. It's gonna make a lot of you out there squirm in your seats, and I apologize in advance. Hit that thumbs up, you know, let's even out the energy. Rats in Victorian England, they were a massive problem. They were everywhere. Every nook and cranny of your home probably had a dirty, fat rat just sitting there with its weird teeth looking at you. From the basement to the pipes, everywhere. It was literally a big problem. There was even an account of them spilling over from royal parks. So imagine that. So of course there's a problem. So of course where there's a problem, there's now a job, right? Someone's got to do something about it. Rat catchers were pretty famous throughout the Victorian era. I mean, of course, brave souls, and they were highly praised in society, but the job obviously wasn't too glamorous. You'd be going into dark, dirty places where rats would make their homes, and we'd catch them, and you'd often have to kill thousands of rats every single year. And then deal with that. I don't even know how you deal with those bodies. I was gonna say bones, ew. More often than not, rat catchers would use other animals like dogs and ferrets to help them hunt down the rats. So you have your own little animal posse hunting down other animals. You would feel pretty good. You'd feel like the king of animals almost. Probably not, eh? It's probably a disgusting job. You probably hate it every day.
Number 5, dresses too big. This is something I'm glad isn't a thing anymore. I'm not a person who likes to dress up. I'm a simple dude. Casual and comfortable is my forte. However uncomfortable wearing suits is, I like to think I clean up well. And I understand sometimes you gotta wear drip. It's just how life goes. Sometimes you gotta dress up. I just don't think people should be showing up to any formal events in cowboy boots and a popped collar shirt. I've known a few of those people. But what I'm really talking about here is the obtuse size of women's dresses and just the whole culture of women's fashion back then. It's just crazy. Large and overbearing dresses with enough material to use as blankets when you sleep. I know that couldn't have been fun. It's horrible. Especially with my sweat problem. A few hours in a suit and maybe a few beers later, and the first thing I'm trying to do is take the suit off. It gets tight and sweaty in there, and it's just a lot of material. It's just too much. And doorways, trying to get through doorway. Ugh. Forget about it. Number 4, fava beans. Well, after all that sweating and being around all that foulness, ladies needed to detox. How about a nice face mask made of beef? Yes, that's right. To keep their skin young and beautiful, they would drape a slice of beef over their face. Nothing like a little Hannibal Lecter before bedtime. Now, I hear you saying, well, Chad, that's not that bad. Okay, but think about this though. For the time period, that beef was probably yucky due to food processing practices of the time, and there's just no fridges. That means it was stinky. I hope it was at least winter before these ladies decided to beef up like that. This process of beef was supposed to rejuvenate the skin because beef contains some important vitamins for such. I can't recommend that. You just walk in with the beef and, hello darling, yes. Gross. Number 3, hot Christmas. This is just so dumb. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell everyone at home right now not to do this, because I know some of you, and some of you are gonna be like, oh, thanks, Chetty, that's cool. No, don't do it. I'm a doctor, a lawyer, and a firefighter. Basically, this was a super fun game that felt like something out of Johnny Knoxville's head, not Victorian families gathering at Christmas. Basically, they would gather at Christmas to play a game called Snapdragon. You get a bowl of raisins and almonds, you pour some brandy in there, and maybe one out for your homie, and ignite the brandy. Once the bowl is on fire, the family will compete to see who can grab the flaming treats and eat them the fastest. Okay, second-degree burns are not how I want to spend my holiday season, and also, in a time before smoke alarms and a modern fire service, this sounds like a really bad time. Grandpa could lose it out of his hands. Drapes catch fire, the house burns down, probably the whole neighborhood. Just a bad idea. Also, I hate raisins, so setting them on fire? Yeah, I'm out. I don't like raisins. They're gross, dude. I don't like them. Number 2, crypt pics. Look, it's a part of life. It happens. You live, you love, and depending on how much your wife likes interior design, you probably have a sign hanging up like that in your home somewhere that says something like that. You know what I'm talking about. And after spending all that time in HomeSense, it's all over. Fade to black, cease to exist, the forever box. There's a whole process and respect in the undertaking business. The Victorian era had a strange tradition, however. How about taking photographs with the body of a family member who has recently passed on? Yeah, that's right, I know. I couldn't believe it, really. People would sit there for minutes taking photos of those who are no longer with us because the process of taking photos was not great. This isn't the digital age, after all. This is something that the crypt keeper would make you do. Keep them in the album or something. Just not for your everyday family, man. That's just weird. Yes, now we're going to take photos. Like, that's just weird, you know? It's just weird. It's weird. Number 1, Jack the Ripper. Listen, the women of Victorian London feared this guy. And how can you blame them? A terror that seemed to come from nowhere and could strike from anywhere. Humans unaliving other humans is nothing new, and it probably won't be old. It won't get old soon. This is what we do. It's kind of our thing. But this was the first modern serial unaliver. Jack the Ripper's identity has never been found. It's only been speculated, and some studies suggest that it has been revealed, but it's really hard to pinpoint something that happened that long ago. He was nasty and the crimes were awful. The photographs of the crime scene do not exactly follow today's media rules or decency, as it's really just horrible and it's just really messy and bloody and just gross. It's kind of hard to talk about this era without Jack the Ripper. Women should feel safe at night no matter what era it is. That's right, ladies, I'm on your side.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Tichborne case. This was quite a bizarre legal case that captivated Victorian England in the 1860s and 1870s. It involved a claimant named Arthur Orton, who alleged that he was the long-lost heir to the Tichborne baronetcy. Despite numerous inconsistencies in his story, Arthur managed to convince some members of the Tichborne family and a significant portion of the public that he was who he claimed to be. The case went to trial in 1873 and it became a media sensation, with thousands of people lining up outside the courthouse to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. This was basically like the Victorian era's OJ trial, or the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, you know? The people wanted to know. Despite Arthur's conviction for perjury, the case continued to fascinate the public for years to come, and it became a symbol of the era's fascination with sensationalism and fraud. The Tichborne case remains one of the most infamous legal cases in British history and is a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing in something without sufficient evidence. In our number 9 spot today, we have the London beer flood. This sounds like it would be quite a fun time, but it was anything but that, and instead was a tragic event that occurred on October 17, 1814 in the St. Giles district of London. At the Mew and Company Brewery, a massive vat containing over 135,000 gallons of beer suddenly ruptured, causing a wave of beer to flood the surrounding streets. The torrent of beer destroyed several nearby houses, killing 8 people and injuring many others. The flood was so powerful that it even knocked down the wall of a nearby pub, trapping and killing some of the patrons inside. The London beer flood was caused by a combination of factors, including poor construction of the vat and overfilling it with beer. The brewery had a history of safety concerns, and many of the workers were aware of the dangers associated with working there. Despite this, the brewery continued to operate and tragedy struck. The incident became the subject of much media attention at the time, and it continues to be remembered today as a tragic and bizarre event in London's history. The victims of the flood were commemorated with a plaque on the site of the former brewery, and the incident has been the subject of numerous articles, books, and even a stage play. Not sure the logistics of that one though. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Victorian bicycle craze. This is a name to refer to a period of intense enthusiasm for bicycles that swept across Europe and North America in the late 19th century. The introduction of the safety bicycle with its chain-driven mechanism and rubber tires made cycling a much more accessible activity for the general public. It became a popular mode of transportation and leisure activity, particularly among the middle middle and upper classes. The craze also had a significant impact on fashion, with women's clothing becoming more practical and comfortable to allow for cycling. It's funny to think of now because it's just a bike, but at the time it was so much more than that. It's like how smartphones completely changed our lives in more ways than we probably even know. That's basically what the bike was like in the Victorian era. The bicycle craze had a profound impact on society and culture at the time. It led to the development of new industries such as cycling clubs, and it also paved the way for the modern transportation industry. The bicycle became a symbol of freedom and empowerment, particularly for women who were able to travel further and faster than ever before. The Victorian bicycle craze remains an important cultural and historical phenomenon that changed the way people lived, worked, and played. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a conflict fought between 1853 and 1856, primarily involving Russia and an alliance of France, Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. The war was fought over various territorial and religious disputes, particularly regarding the rights of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. The war was marked by high casualties, particularly from disease and poor medical care, and it is often seen as a turning point in military medicine. The war also featured some of the first extensive use of modern technologies such as telegraphs and railways, which greatly impacted warfare in the future. The war ended in a victory for the Allied forces, and it resulted in a significant shakeup of the balance of power in Europe. It also demonstrated the need for improved communication, organization, and medical care in military conflicts, and it had significant long-term impacts on military and political strategies in Europe and beyond. In our number 6 spot today, we have the East End outbreak. The East End outbreak was an outbreak of cholera in 1866 and was a major epidemic that struck the densely populated area of East London, causing widespread illness and death. Cholera is a highly contagious disease that spreads through contaminated water, and in the Victorian era, London's water supply was notoriously unsanitary. The outbreak was particularly devastating in the East End, where poverty and overcrowding made residents more vulnerable to disease. The outbreak led to significant changes in public health policy and infrastructure, as well as increased public awareness of the importance of sanitation and hygiene. The physician John Snow, which, feels like a weird name to say when I'm not talking about Game of Thrones, but the physician John Snow played a key role in identifying the source of the outbreak, tracing it to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street. His work really paved the way for the development of modern epidemiology and disease prevention. The East End cholera outbreak remains a significant event in the history of public health and the struggle for social justice. It brought attention to the urgent need for clean water and adequate sanitation, and it helped to spur reforms that improved the health and well-being of people in urban areas.
In 5th place, we have job inequality. Come on, it's not enough to pay women less. We gotta give them the crappier jobs as well. The lowest paying jobs available to working class London women were matchbox making and sorting rags in a rag factory, where flea and lice-ridden rags were to be sorted to be pulped for manufacturing paper. Needlework was the single largest paid occupation for women working from home, but the work paid little, and women often had to rent sewing machines if they could not purchase them. So where's that money going? These home manufacturing industries became known as sweated industries. The Select Committee of the House of Commons defined sweated industries in 1890 as work carried on for inadequate wages and for excessive hours in unsanitary conditions. Wow, I'm shocked. By 1906, such workers earned about a penny an hour. In 4th place, we have limitations on hobbies. Yep. Because controlling a woman's body, work, and forcing her to run a household and reproduce wasn't enough. Nah. Women's physical activity was a cause of concern at the highest levels of academic research during this time. Sadly, here in Canada, physicians debated the appropriateness of women using bicycles. Remember that purity culture I mentioned a moment ago? Yeah, here we go again. A series of letters published in the Dominion Medical Monthly and Ontario Medical Journal in 1896 expressed concern that women seated on a bicycle seat could have an organ. Oh no. Fearful of unleashing and creating a nation of oversexed females, some physicians urged colleagues to encourage women to give up modern dangers and continue to pursue traditional leisure pursuits. Seriously? However, not all medical colleagues were convinced of the link between cycling and and this debate on women's leisure activities continued well into the 20th century. In the early part of the 19th century, it was believed that physical activity was dangerous and inappropriate for women. Girls were taught to reserve their delicate health for the express purpose of birthing healthy children, and one of these considered benefits of the corset was to restrict respiration. Don't worry, I'll get back to corset hell and myths in just a moment. Furthermore, the physiological differences between the sexes helped to reinforce the societal inequality. An anonymous female writer was able to contend that women were not intended to fill male roles because women are, as a rule, physically smaller and weaker than men. Their brain is much lighter, and they are in every way unfitted for the same amount of bodily or mental labor that men are able to undertake. Well, pardon me and my tiny brain. Can I be excused and paid to go sit on a fainting couch? In third place, we have corset trends. I'm gonna start this by making sure everyone knows that I'm emphasizing the harmful trends, not dismissing corsets as a whole. I'm personally a huge fan of corsets in various historical shapewear, since when worn properly, they're actually quite comfortable and beneficial to one's health and posture. Improperly worn corsets, or ones worn too tight, can cause a variety of problems, and my displaced ribs are a sad example of that. Anyhow, allow me to continue before I sidetrack myself to infinity and beyond. Victorian women's clothing followed trends that emphasized elaborate dresses, skirts with wide volume created by the use of layered materials such as crinolines, hoop skirt frames, and heavy fabrics. The ideal silhouette of the time demanded a narrow waist, which was accomplished by constricting the abdomen with a tightly laced corset. While the silhouette was striking, and the dresses themselves were often exquisitely detailed creations, the fashions weren't ideal. At best, they restricted women's movements, and at worst, they had a harmful effect on women's health. Physicians turned their attention to the use of corsets and determined that they caused several medical problems: compression of the thorax, restricted breathing, organ displacement, poor circulation, and prolapsed uterus. Oh no, can't harm that baby-making factory. Articles advocating the reform of women's clothing by the British National Health Society, the Ladies' Dress Association, and the Rational Dress Society were reprinted in the Canada Lancet, Canada's medical journal. Nowadays, corsets are a choice, not a necessity, and I often prefer them over the more popular underwire bra. In second place, we have Magdalen Asylums. So Magdalen Asylums, also known as Magdalen Laundries, were initially Protestant, but later mostly Roman Catholic institutions that operated from the 18th to the late 20th centuries to house fallen women. The institutions were named after the biblical figure Mary Magdalene, who in earlier centuries characterized as a reformed lady of the night. The term referred to female sexual promiscuity or work in undesirable fields, young women who became pregnant outside of marriage, or young women who just didn't have familial support. They were required to work without pay. Apart from meager food provisions, the institutions operated large commercial laundries, serving customers outside of their bases. Many of these laundries were effectively operated as penitentiary workhouses. The strict regimes in the institutions were often more severe than those found in prisons. This contradicted the perceived outlook that they were meant to help women, as opposed to punishing them. The last one known closed only in 1996, which is a year before I was born, so they went on for way too long. In our first place, we have Woman of the Night. During the Victorian age, women selling their bodies was a wide-scale problem in Britain. The very essence of it went against every moral value that was promoted during this time. Values such as, chastity, prudence, and grace were dismissed and disregarded by fallen women. These women were led into this line of work for varying reasons, the most prominent being, social and economic concerns. Upon entering into this world, there were several different avenues that could be taken by women, including military encampments, brothels, and street walking. The number of women participating in this trade during the Victorian age was staggeringly high. Although London police reports recorded that there were approximately 8,600 women of the night known to them, it has been suggested that the true number during this time was closer to 80,000. As a result, concerns were raised, and the prominence led to several government acts. Goodness forbid a woman try and make money for herself on her own terms through selling something that would already be part of a dowry. This act would allow women to barter within the marketplace without influence of men who would often take their earnings in goods.
Number 10. Jack the Ripper. If we were to pick a poster boy for this list, it'd be him. Jack the Ripper was the alias given to the unknown criminal with sick tastes. During a period in the late 1800s, there was a string of cold-blooded de-lifings that affected London. Victorian London, to be specific. It got so bad that they were telling people not to go out at night in fear of the Ripper. Ooh, that does not sound good. His crimes were extremely graphic and violent and meant for a much more mature and suitable audience. Just to make things even worse, he was never caught or really even fully identified. Some of the theories say he was a she, he was multiple people, or even Prince Albert. I thought it was Prince Albert at one point. They really don't know. Oh, that's terrible. That's just awful. Right, I'll go out with you, but your Ripper could be out. Number 9. Charles Bravo. Mr. Bravo succumbed to his illness in 1876. He had been poisoned with antimony, which at first when I read that, I thought it said alimony, and I feel like a lot of husbands died of that. That's a divorce joke for everybody at home. With antimony, which is a poison that works course very slowly. Slowly enough that he would have known what was happening. Thus, he quite possibly knew who did it, but never revealed who did. At the time, it was believed to be a manual checkout, if you will. What's crazy about this case, though, is that it's like a game of Clue. The wife was having an affair with a doctor, so you know, there was something there. There was also a disgruntled maid who all wanted a piece of Mr. Bravo. Yes. The family fun game night conclusion was it was the wife in the library with the candlestick. I meant the poison. She poisoned him. It was her with the poison. We think. That's the running theory. We still don't know. Number 8. Thames Torso. The Thames River is famous for being a stinky, rotten, no good, very bad river filled with the most heinous refuse humans have to offer. That's right, love. It's awful, isn't it? Oh, it's bloody awful. So, to some, it shouldn't be a surprise that in September of 1873, a woman's torso was recovered from the river. Hold on to your barf bag, folks, because it's only going to get worse from here. There was also lungs, a right thigh, a right shoulder, and lastly, a scalp of the face, and it is attached. It is gross. Ugh, they found that as well. Authorities did their best to reconstruct the body, but this isn't a Malibu plastic surgery office. They even sat out the face on display in hopes the public could identify the victim. One man suspected it was his missing daughter, but a positive ID could not be made. Thus, we know nothing about the case. Number 7. The Gattons. In 1898, adult siblings Michael, Nora, and Ellen Murphy were on their way home Boxing Day after an entertaining day out. They made their way home after a dance had been cancelled. And sometimes it happens, but they still made the best of it, and you know what? I respect that. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the afternoon. That's awesome. However, they never made it home. Their bodies were discovered in a grisly, bloody scene. I mean, really bad. Skulls were crushed, bodies were beaten, and someone had done in the horse. I mean, they shot the horse. That's crazy. No witnesses, I guess. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the siblings. It's really scary. Number 6. Edwin Bartlett. Edwin Bartlett, like many other people in the Victorian era, was in need of a good dentist. I can use one too. I need braces. I'll be so cute with braces. A lack of dental hygiene made for many issues back then. So, if you take away anything from this list today, folks, it's brush your teeth and go see your dentist. It's important. Well, he went to the dentist because his breath had been so bad he had to sleep in separate beds from his wife. He had so much buildup and gunk in there. It was that bad. Gross. For me, it's because I fart in my sleep, or at least so I'm told. That's what everyone says. I don't know. At the time, Mrs. Bartlett asked her husband to pick up a large portion of chloroform because that was legal back then. You just pick up some chloroform. Okay, sure. What a time to be alive. He later was found with chloroform in his system, a large amount. The missus somehow convinced the court that she was innocent. A study done almost 100 years later confirmed it was her. Well, at least maybe it was her. We're, again, still not sure because it was so long ago.
In 5th place, we have grave robbing. Now, my first thought when I said that just now was grave robber the character, which only goes to show how much Repo the Genetic Opera has rotted my brain. One of the most lucrative side hustles of the Victorian era was grave robbing, and the fresher the corpse, the better. Medical students needed cadavers to study, so a black market of corpses arose, enriching adventurous thieves and angering families of the dearly departed. The 19th century was also a fertile age of exploration, and one of the most impressive discoveries were ancient mummies that the people of Victorian England brought home from Egyptian vacations. They'd invite all of their friends over for unwrapping parties, which tended to be rather grim spectacles that nevertheless delighted the morbid weirdos. Look, while I don't condone it, I wouldn't mind time traveling back to be a fly on the wall at those parties, since I definitely classify myself as a morbid weirdo. At one notable gathering for the unwrapping of Nescons, the second wife of Theban high priest Pinogem II was placed in a contraption that made her appear to dance. The demand for mummies to take home was so high that Egyptians started transporting them from less visited ruins to areas that had a lot more traffic. Hey, whatever helps the economy. In 4th place, we have garden hermits. So the next time somebody shows off their garden to you, make sure to ask where they keep their hermit. And if they don't have one, make sure to comment on how undignified it is. In the Victorian era, wealthy families hired people to don full hermit garb, complete with robes, long hair, beards, and hermit glasses, and live as an ornamental garden hermit on their land. The biggest rule of all, though? No speaking to anyone on the property. And honestly, sounds like a dream job to me. Ugh, being paid in-house to not speak to anyone and just be like a silly little decoration feature? Sounds like upgraded background work, and I will totally take it. Granted, that's if someone wants like a spooky, ooky, gothic garden feature. I'm all yours. In 3rd place, we have shock treatment. No, I'm not talking about the cursed as all get out sequel to Rocky Horror, but more people should be. I've only watched it once, but it does have some bops for sure. In the 19th century, Victorians thought electrotherapy could fix everything from gout to muscle problems. All you had to do was pay your local electrotherapist who shocked the problem area, but really all it did was leave a lot of people with icky scars. In more modern times though, it has been refined to work well for muscle issues, but wasn't always that way. In second place, we have weird face masks. Patented in 1875, Madame Raleigh's face mask was strapped to a woman's head overnight, 3 nights per week. That was how you do it, you followed the rules. Made of flexible India rubber, the mask could be filled with unguents and all manners of salves and bleaches to treat the skin. However, the mask did have a second purpose, which was to make the face sweat all night long. Also called the face glove, the device would excite perspiration with a view to soften and clarify the skin by relieving the pores and the superficial circulation. Inventor Helen Raleigh claimed the mask could be used by persons suffering with certain forms of disease or afflicted with a bad complexion, which came in the form of cutaneous eruptions, blotches, pimples, freckles, or fugitive discolorations, and for clogged pores and capillary congestion. So, cure-all? Now, this mask became very, very popular and led to some market competition. One improved overnight mask was made of flannel, while another complained that existing masks didn't allow for poisonous gases to escape, so she proposed layers of chamois and satin. And hey, if all else failed, Victorian women layered raw beef or veal over their faces before bed. I love a good face mask as much as the next person, but I think I'll stick with what I already know. In first place, we have corpse medicine. The Victorian era ushered in the tail end of corpse medicine, which was the practice of ingesting different parts of the human body to cure various ailments. One popular drink to cure apoplexy mixed powdered human skull and chocolate, while the most coveted remedy mixed skull with booze. To each their own. By the 19th century, most doctors had moved away from this barbarous practice, but medical texts and cookbooks that explained how to best prepare a body part suggested that it was far from dead. To get fresh supplies, people often went to an executioner rather than a pharmacist, paying good money for the freshest of fresh products as recommended by a doctor that was shockingly not accused of being a vampire. I even found a recipe for red fluid marmalade.
Number 10, the Fuzzy Wonder. Growing up, I had the classic red toy car. It was great. I would honk the horn, slam the door with attitude, wearing a diaper. It was the perfect invention for a youngin' like me. But back in the Victorian era, the toys or whatever, not as fun. Definitely not as fun. Fisher-Price wasn't born yet, so if you wanted to wheel around and kill time, maybe even have a few laughs, well, you had to use this. The Fuzzy Wonder. Yeah, this, let's unpack this one, shall we? This patent, I'll be honest, this patent here makes me think. It makes me wonder more than anything. Why didn't this change history? Are you kidding me? The fuzzy seat, the gears, the foot straps, the possibilities are endless with the Fuzzy Wonder. The only thing that we do know about this patent, the only hint as to who or what this was for is written right below the product's name. It says the Fuzzy Wonder, the champion of his species. His species? You're telling me there's more of these? Where's the Fuzzy Champion? Let's take him for a spin. He's probably got an engine. It's probably great. I go shopping riding one of these for sure. Definitely. Wheeling around, throwing stuff in. Easy. Number 9, top hat cigar holders. Yeah, this one here is so Victorian. I love it. In the Victorian era, smoking cigars was a popular pastime amongst wealthy men. If you were rich, you had to smoke cigars all day, every day, and then cough nonstop. Cigar holders, of course, were used to prevent the cigar smoke from directly entering the smoker's mouth and to keep the cigar cool and on your persons. There were various types of cigar holders during the Victorian era, ranging from simple wooden or metal tubes to more elaborate designs made of ivory, silver, or sometimes gold. Fancy schmancy. Some holders were designed to be attached at the end of a walking stick, while others could be worn as a pendant on a chain, or in this case, for some reason, a top hat. Yeah, why is there smoke coming from that man's head? I wonder if he's okay. Oh, he's just bad. That's cool. My mistake, sir. Continue on with your Victorian cigar stroll. Yeah, people's heads were smoking. They would keep all of them lit on their top hat. What a weird place to hold them. Cigar holders were often personalized with the owner's initials or family crest, and they were considered a status symbol, although it looked ridiculous on a top hat. This was a way to flex your wealth, you know what I mean? There were no broke boys walking around with top hats. No way. Or cigar holders on said top hats. No way, that's insane. That's a lot of weight on a hat. I'd be doing this a lot. Number 8, the fork and knife cleaner. In theory, in the Victorian era, this one sounds great, but it also seems like way more effort than just hand washing, you know? I don't know, let's talk about it. Invented in 1850 by Thomas Parker in Kensington, the knife and fork cleaner in the 1850s, it was pretty significant. It was a big improvement in the process of cleaning cutlery, a bit, I guess. Prior to this invention, cleaning knives and forks was a time-consuming time-consuming and often challenging task. Definitely harder than it is today to wash a dish. The knife and fork cleaner consisted of a handheld device with multiple bristles and brushes and gears that would all fit around the knife or the fork, and then it would spin and move around. Again, looks like a saw trap. The user would then rub the utensil back and forth through the bristles to remove any food or debris. It took a while, and like I'm saying, a little bit more effort probably. This invention was particularly used for commercial kitchens where large quantities of cutlery needed to be cleaned quickly, so restaurants, whatever. It was also popular among households, even though it didn't last too long. It's definitely worth a mention. It looks scary more than anything. I wouldn't be like, ugh, clean up my fork, like don't eat my arm, thank you. Number 7, Vigor's horse action saddle. All right, now we're into it. Here we go. I mentioned the Fuzzy Wonder earlier. This thing here, Vigor's horse action saddle. Yeah, action saddle. We've got some action here. There we go. This saddle would sit somewhere in your home, ideally in a place where no one else could see you. That's great, that's a start. The way they marketed this thing back then, they made it sound like it was an actual health benefit riding this big vibrator, for lack of a better term. That's all it did. It just vibrated and you sat on it. That's all I'll say. It's all I'm allowed to say. On the patent, it states that Vigor's horse action saddle can promote good spirits, it quickens circulation, it stimulates the liver, and probably other places, and it even creates an appetite. Yeah, all that in a thing that shakes you up in the corner of your house. Imagine it's the Victorian era and you have to watch your drunk uncles take turns riding this thing all weekend long. This is far too intimate for the family room. This is kind of gross. Yeah, it vibrates a lot and really hard, so that's it. You can do the rest. You can think the rest of the thoughts, dirty freaks. Number 6, the toilet mask. Madame Rowley's toilet mask. Okay, where do I even begin with this one? At first, I thought that this was a mask that you had to wear while you took a shit. I mean, compared to everything else on this list, I was like, yeah, sure. People would wear the Phantom of the Opera masks every time they had to go to the washroom. Probably, who knows? They were weird back then. A toilet mask was not that. I mean, not too far from that. A toilet mask was a natural beautifier for bleaching and preserving your skin. Victorian bleach. Easy, that's fun. The patent even stated that this mask would remove complexion imperfections. Complexion imperfections, see you later. Huh, what a treat. How lucky are we? All you have to do is wear this mask 3 times a week. For how long? I don't know, doesn't say. Just feel it out, I guess. Just feel out the bleach. Turns out lead cosmetics pasted onto a mask and bleach, turns out it was not beneficial for your health at all. Who knew? Not me. Yes, let me put on my bleach mask before, well, I can't breathe or see anymore. Never mind, I'm gonna stop wearing that.
Victorians actually liked to collect weird stuff so much they made curiosity cabinets. Victorians were curious people with an interest in nature, the sciences, anatomy, botany, and morbidity. And for the upper class citizens, collecting scientific objects showed they were sophisticated and educated, often displaying their collections in a curiosity cabinet. These German cabinets were a way for the wealthy to show off their hobby. Oftentimes beautiful wooden display cases with elaborate carvings and glass fronts, or a larger, narrow, open shelving style bookcase. Curiosity cabinets were usually kept in places where guests could see them to stir conversations about the pieces. And collecting was a social activity that allowed you to share your interests and also show off what you knew in a humble manner. Many curiosity cabinets were eclectic, filled to the brim with unrelated mixed oddities. Although most collectors were not formally trained, this never deterred anyone, and even working class people started collecting items like buttons, fetishes, pocket-sized portraits, stones, and animal bones. Death, insect, and human oddity photographs were as popular as Pokemon. Even oddity performers made business cards called carte de visite, a small photograph card collectible of themselves. Joseph Merrick, a professional showman known as the Elephant Man, was a popular carte de visite, and he worked for the next topic on the list, the freak shows. It was a weirdly massive part of the Victorian culture, described as a family-friendly commercial event. They were the entertainment pinnacle. The name itself is offensive, and many Victorians even then boycotted the shows for its mockery and ableism. But the shows acted as a source of solace for performers that were often disabled or had genetic differences that made them potentially rejectable from society and potentially their own families. In the Victorian era, asylums were hellish, and if that was your option or a job in the circus, many made the choice to live in a welcoming community of similarly ostracized people with differences. Siamese twins, extra limbs, excessive hair growth, malformation, and many married and had children and functioning lives of normalcy despite making a living performing for audiences as freaks. Their stories embody the magnificent resiliency of human spirit, and they make a killing off the lustrous need for weirdness in the Victorian era, emptying wallets of people who wouldn't accept them outside of a show ring and living more financially financially secure than they did. The show started in the 1500s but hit their boom in the 1800s, and the best performers were often found in Queen Victoria's own court. Some famous names were Millie and Christine McCoy, John Merrick, Fanny Mills, Prince Rondian, and Ella Harper. Next up is how Victorian oddity obsession literally irreparably destroyed a ton of history: Egyptomania. It began in 1798 with the launch of Napoleon's campaigns in Egypt and Syria, a fitting example of imperialism when they find the Rosetta Stone. Europe goes on a mission to proliferate and appropriate any and all Egyptian antiquity or aesthetic, culture vulture style. The Egyptian obsession consumed Western thought, revealing itself through their literature, art, and culture at the time. This included their mummy unwrapping parties and novels such as Arthur Conan Doyle's Lot 249, and also their decor. Anyone who could afford to travel to Egypt could realistically afford to buy a mummy because they kind of sold them at bazaars like Barbies at Walmart. When it came to mummy unwrapping parties, Victorians let their intrigue cloud their, judgment, human decency, morals, conscience. Man, am I missing anything? It was a form of entertainment that was a complete desecration of Egypt, its people, and their ancestors. Thomas Pettigrew, who was a surgeon, antiquary, and an author, was a well-known unroller. At one notable gathering for the unwrapping of Neshkins, the second wife of Theban high priest Piagem II was placed in a contraption that made her appear to dance. The demand for mummies to take home was so high that Egyptians even started transporting them from less visited ruins to areas that got more traffic. Hundreds are now lost, as are their tomb locations. These gatherings thankfully died out in the later years of the 19th century, not because Victorians realized their inhumanity, but because of boredom. Because the Victorians were greedy, nothing filled their interest for very long, except occult and spiritualism. They put that bleep in everything: books, newspapers, clothes, art, decor, parties. The modern spiritualism movement was generally agreed to start on April 1st of 1848 in Hydesville, New York, when teen sisters claimed to speak to a ghost of a man killed in their home. News that spread worldwide and that had a complete fascination chokehold on England, causing the spiritualism movement of the 1860s and attracting people from different social classes, including Queen Victoria. The most popular forms of occult interest in the late Victorian period include mesmerism, clairvoyance, electrobiology, crystal gazing, specialty newspapers, public seances, thought reading, and above all else, conjuring. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, like many late Victorians, was fascinated by the possibility of communication with the departed souls. The core belief of their spiritualism movement was that the living could communicate with the dead through the help of a medium endowed with the supernatural gift during the mysterious and entertaining seance phenomena or performance. Charlatans will always take advantage, after all. Within the late Victorian counterculture of spiritualism, a number of women and men gained fame and authority as skilled mediums. And now for the original garden gnome, the dirty old man in the backyard. See this? This is a gnome. If you're a basic B word, you might consider just tossing one of these among your flowers and calling it a day. No, you want this. See this? This is the dirty old dude that you would hire to live menacingly in your backyard. Why? I don't know. Why not? I don't have an answer for you. So yeah, in the Victorian era, 18th century, wealthy families hired people to don full hermit garb, complete with robes, long hair, beards, and as Campbell cites from an advertisement in 1797, hermit is never to leave the place or hold a conversation with anyone for 7 years, during which he's neither to wash himself or cleanse himself in any way whatever, but is to let his hair and nails on both hands and feet grow as long as nature will permit them. These hired hermits would then lodge in shacks, caves, and other hermitages constructed on the homeowner's property, a rustic fairy tale manor or a creepy, I don't really know. It was a practice mostly found in England, although it made it up to Scotland and over to Ireland as well, but it originates in Rome. Emperor Hadrian had one of these at his villa in Tivoli as a thinking lodge, as did Pope Pius III. From there, it gradually verged away from religious devotees seeking isolation for themselves for spiritual reflection to a stinky dude lodging for an 18th century profession. It might seem like a whimsical garden feature, but it was all about that most celebrated Georgian England emotion, melancholy. Introspection and somberness of spirit were prized amongst the elite, and rules that they asked their hermits to play embodied this because they weren't able to do it themselves. The ornamental hermit vanished at the end of the 18th century to be replaced by these ugly little monstrosities. So go stomp on a gnome today, everyone.
Number 10. Tulle skirts. Tulle skirts were a major problem. Although these were chiefly worn by ballerinas, ballet has always been a destructive form of dance when it comes to basically how it affects the body. I mean, many ballerinas literally have their toenails fall off as a result of dancing on point. That's just kind of like an assumed part of the profession if you're dancing point. However, we aren't even talking about the feet here. We're actually talking about how safe the costumes are, the literal garments they dance around in, not even their shoes or their feet. The answer to that question? They're not very safe. Considering that before electricity many danced on candlelit stages, you'd likely be horrified to hear just how flammable these costumes were. There are many examples throughout history of ballerinas and dancers getting too close to candle flames while in their costumes and basically lighting on fire. And I gotta say, I've listened to multiple podcasts that have talked about this, so I could recommend some to you. If you want some, let me know in the comments, I'll send them your way. Emma Livry is by far one of the most famous ballerinas though to have caught flame. She actually did initially survive the incident, but she died 8 months later as a result of her injuries. It sounds terrible. And there were honestly countless others who suffered similar fates. The really terrible thing is, back in the day, this is something new that I found out, we actually had the means to make fire retardant costumes, but they affected the aesthetic of the costumes, making the costumes appear a little bit more stiff. So rather than try to save the more than thousands of ballerinas who died in even just a single year, we decided to opt for beauty over safety. To me, that's pretty scandalous, I'm gonna be honest. Scandalous and disappointing. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee and you love learning history with us, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Honestly, we got a lot of fun facts for you and I don't want you to miss out. Number 9, showing some shoulder. Ooh. The crazy thing is we actually just came from an era before this when showing shoulders was actually considered very fashionable. But by the time the Victorian era really started to kick into gear, this was actually considered completely improper. Paintings even had to be repainted to reflect this new trend because showing a bit of shoulder literally frightened some people. They were like, oh, I can't look at it. Repaint that painting. Cover those shoulders up. I'm not joking, that's a real thing. And don't even get me started on cleavage. Shoulders were previously considered to be something beautifully showcased from gowns that had both lower and wider necklines. This was considered beautiful and sexy in a good way. But with puritanical views taking over, anything considered too beautiful and definitely anything considered sexy would be seen as bad and sinful. So we had to cover those shoulders up. Man, if I traveled back to the Victorian era right now, they'd be like, girl, what you doing with those shoulders? Sorry. My shoulders and my ankles are out today. Oh, scandalous. Number 8, the gall dress. Well, Marie Antoinette was not around during the Victorian era, living and dying just before it began really. Her presence was felt in regards to the mark that she left on the fashion scene. Marie Antoinette was often seen as a woman of scandal, not just because of the stories of her love affairs and her actually being misquoted here as responding to the poor, starving people of France by saying, let them eat cake, but also because of her fashion sense. While by today's standards, Marie Antoinette would be seen as probably being overdressed among us, by her time standards, she was often seen as presenting herself as immoral, with many of her dresses resembling more undergarments of the day than the usual more modest finery and typical style. Case in point, a portrait that was done in her chemise style dress, known as a gall, by painter Vigée Lebrun, was condemned for how it portrayed the monarch. People actually admired Lebrun's work in terms of the painting itself, but didn't like the dress that she had painted the queen in, as they felt it appeared too intimate and informal. As a result, the painting was actually removed from display, and Vigée was forced to repaint Marie Antoinette's dress into something more formal and fitting, because it's too risque. We were like, we can't look at the queen like this, it looks terrible. Repaint it. I don't know why I'm making everyone British when we're in France, but there you go. Number 7, fainting room. By today's standards, fainting rooms might seem quite scandalous, and while they were very fashionable back in the day, often being linked to corsets, at least so we think. In reality, fainting rooms actually had less to do with corsets and more to do with people's desires to nap without having to bother with all the business of undressing, getting in bed, getting back up, having the bed remade, and completely redressing. Instead, fainting rooms were a place where you could sneak off to for some peace and quiet during a busy afternoon or major social event, or simply a place you could just go to rest for a bit without having to do the whole sleep time ritual that usually accompanied, going to bed. What's more scandalous is the fact that the women who were known to actually faint back in the day, that is true, and even today women still faint, people still faint, had this malady attached to corsets by physicians. Usually, of course, men back in the day who simply just didn't know what was wrong with these women to make them faint so much. So what did they do? They blamed corsets, of course. Although to be fair, corsets are notoriously bad for your health. But still, I just love that these doctors were like, I don't know what's wrong with this woman. Corsets, they make her faint, that's what it is. Probably iron deficiency, heat, being overdressed in the heat, there's a lot of reasons why people faint. Number 6. Scheele's green. This dye color became super popular in the Victorian era, but is also known for being literally made out of poison. If you're worried that women of the day didn't know that at the time, nah, they were actually informed on this, yet they still chose to wear this color because, it was simply too gorgeous. Hey, it's worth it. A little bit of arsenic poisoning, no problem. It did cause symptoms of arsenic poisoning among those who wore the dresses dyed with this color because it's dye, this fabric is still rubbing up against your skin, still getting absorbed through your pores, but it actually caused even more harm to those who made and dyed the garments with it. Because they're the ones actually breathing that in and stuff. Yikes.
Number 5. Emo girl. All the Forever Alone people, raise your hand. Let me hear you roar XD. I like to joke around a lot and say I'm a lawyer, a firefighter, and the cutest guy on the whole wide internet. But if there's one thing I know, it's people. I like people. I love them. I spend a lot of time with them, and after hearing this, I've come to the conclusion that this is where the emo girls come from. I figured it all out. It's down to a science. I'm a scientist now. Do you ever get that feeling in your tummy on Valentine's Day because you know it's going to be another one alone? And you'll be forced to be on your own, and that means sad music and crying in your room. Same, it's Drake's Marvin room for me. Well, single women in Victorian times had similar issues. Since women were expected to marry and have kids, single women who were also forever alone were pitied by society, which I argue is just way worse. No one wants to be pitied. Ugh. Number 4. Gold diggers. She take my money when I'm in need. She driving. Okay, anyway, back to the actual content. Well, not exactly. While today in a place like sunny California, you might see an older man with a woman who's half his age. Maybe he's driving a nice car, or she's got on the very best and latest from Louis Vuitton. Stylish, yeah. Most of us think some thoughts about what we might think is going on there. We can kind of be judgmental sometimes when we see things like that. However, looking through a lens of 2022 to Victorian times might make the women of Victorian times appear to be gold diggers, but in reality, it was because all of their financials were tied to their husbands, legally too. Which, if you can imagine, that system didn't work too well. What if your husband is broke? What if your husband is running amok with sultry lasses on the street corners? Like I said before, no divorce, but even if she could leave him easily, supporting herself afterwards was going to be an issue, especially financially. Number 3, birth factory. Just pump them out. The faster the better. Quantity over quality. Just get them out. The use of birth control, as you can tell, was not a common practice. Anyone who's over the age of 25, ask your grandparents how many brothers and sisters they have. I'm willing to bet it's in the 6 to 8 range. Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious. A trend that would continue for a few decades after. Education is important, and I'll get to that in my next part. Women were simply expected to act this way. Maybe it was the sign of the times since the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Maybe the factories needed workers, I don't know. Which, in case you didn't know, they used children as employees. Maybe not so nice. Unfortunately, that was when there was an issue, and there were many. They had no HR to go to, and that was the least of their worries, really. Number 2, no school for you. No higher education for women. Banned from going to university. I don't think so, not very nice, no. Honestly, any society that doesn't want half of their population to go to school probably has a few things to work out. It's a boys' club, and they can only go to university so that they can learn to be smarter and be businessmen, so they can earn money and thus have the facilities to court a woman who really doesn't have a choice anyway. Women had jobs, not careers. And they were all the jobs that you can think of. The ones that were too feminine for men. as women were too feeble to participate in the men's job, which is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm happy to say that in 2022, we showed them wrong. Chetty loves everyone. Just remember that, I love everybody. You go, girls. Number 1, strict rules. Okay, so after a night in the bed sheets with the gal that you love, or maybe the one that you found, there's a good chance that 9 months later, a smaller version of you two could be walking around. A byproduct of intimacy, if you will. This was always something I wanted to rant about, but I always found it strange how strict parents and teachers from this time were with their kids. You gotta brush your hair, bed made, and whatever you do, don't ask for more gruel. Please, sir, could I have some more? Whatever that Charles Dickens book was, I think it was Oliver Twist. They made us read those books as kids, and I don't know why, because they're kind of boring. From the extreme military code ethics happening at home to the long days in a factory at work, being a kid was tough, man. Earning the punk rock blues of today. I'm just a kid and my life is a nightmare. Number 10, Queen Victoria. Is so bloody herself, Her Royal Majesty and Queen of the British Empire. Queen Victoria. She's responsible for a lot of things, including a nice long holiday in the summer where dads get to be irresponsible with fireworks. Nice. All fun jokes aside, she was the queen of the monarch and she wasn't the worst queen ever, but during her reign, the British Empire had never really been stronger, as it took part in absorbing many smaller nations into the empire. And they didn't ask nicely, if you catch my drift. India, China, and a lot of parts of Africa. Africa had a rough time back then. It was pretty hard for that continent. They all felt the wrath of the Queen's expansionist fist. It's really sad, actually. Goddamn. Number 9, thieves. Times, specifically in Victorian London, weren't the best. It most certainly wasn't the cleanliest place on earth, and there were orphans asking for more porridge. I don't know. I didn't read the book, guys. Sorry. Lack of rights, social expectations and pressure, and a lot of double standards. Honestly, it just wasn't an easy time for women. Well, it shouldn't really come as a surprise, but thievery and pickpocketing were often done even by women though. I mean, what choice do you have at that point? The idea of ladies was so ladylike or elegant that it wasn't possible, or at least people thought it wasn't possible, that they could be criminals. What a backhanded compliment. What, are women a criminal? I certainly don't think so, sir. It's not possible. It's very possible. There are tons of thieves and pickpockets. That's just ridiculous. Number 8, Jane Toppin. Take a trip with me to Boston. We can see Bunker Hill, Old North Church, and Faneuil Hall. Ooh, cool. We could also visit a very nice nurse from the 1880s who was taking care of the elderly. Jolly Jane, as she became to be known, was a nurse who took care of the elderly. And by take care, I mean the same way you took care of your first hamster. Yeah, not so great, was it? Now, how did he know that? I know. She would dose up the old geezers with a healthy Keith Richards-sized dose of morphine. Yeah! There's only so much rock stars that can handle that level of rock and roll. And guys, Grandma and Grandpa, they're not one of them. They can't handle that kind of stuff. After that, she would lay down with them and just like chill with the body, because that's what you do. Ugh. Before she was caught, there was an estimated 31 grandmas and grandpas not at the dinner table after having her as a nurse.
I'm just gonna lay down right beside you. It's gonna be great. Just gonna lay down.
Number 7, Typhoid Mary. My mom wasn't the best cook on planet Earth, but God willing she tried. You know, she really put in a lot of work. Excuse the meme here, but she makes a mean spaghetti though. God, I love mom's spaghetti. I really do. And her cookies. Oh, she makes the best cookies. Everyone should agree with me in the comments section so I can show my mom and tell her she hasn't made cookies in a while. Tell my mom to make some cookies. It's time she makes cookies, man. They're so freaking good. They're the best on earth, I swear. Well, my mother is okay. She doesn't make up the Gordon Ramsay standards. But that's okay, because no matter how well Typhoid Mary made the lamb sauce, it was always gonna make people green, as Typhoid Mary was an asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever. Yes, that's what we're talking about, Typhoid Mary. Crazy enough, after she found out that she was asymptomatic with typhoid, she insisted upon cooking. She kept going, which got more people sick. Surprise. She was forcibly quarantined multiple times in her life. You can't make this stuff up. Please stop cooking, you're sick. I'm gonna do what I want, you can't tell me what to do. Number 6, Belle Starr. You know, for those who enjoy adult entertainment, her name kind of sounds like it came from there, right? Anyway, she was a cowgirl and outlaw in the 1880s and in the Lone Star State. She was married to an Indian, and oftentimes as a couple would offer help to other outlaws needing refuge at their ranch. In 1883, her and her husband were caught trying to steal a horse, very RDR of them, and spent time in the old slammer. They continued their outlaw ways until it all went Dutch Vanderland, meaning it didn't go very well. One day, like any other good western, a stranger had come to the ranch, kind of out of nowhere, and gave Belle Starr a taste of the law. Just happened to be with a big iron. To this day, nobody knows what happened, who the stranger was, or why she was bang bang. No one knows. No one understands. It's crazy. There should be a movie about that. Big iron on his hip, all fancy. Anyway.
At number 5, no divorce. Nowadays, divorce is quite common. All you have to do is sign a paper and you're done. But back in the Victorian era, before the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 allowed divorce, people had to find different ways of getting rid of their spouses. After all, just because there was no divorce doesn't mean that everyone was happy in their marriages. It turns out that in order to solve their problems and get rid of their spouse, people would just sell their wives, either in public or in private sales. Most of the time, a man would take his wife to the town square and just sell her off to a new man. According to some records, some women had the power to veto a sale, and sometimes it was for cash. Though I think the cheapest that a wife was ever sold for was a pint of beer. This wasn't necessarily bad for the woman, because if she was sold to someone else, things could sometimes work out and she could live a better life with a better spouse. And if she didn't, then she would just get sold again and get to try her luck with a new man. At number 4, food additives. These days, people are becoming more and more concerned with artificial additives in their food. All natural, organic, pesticide, and hormone-free food is becoming more and more popular, but back in the Victorian era, people were putting all kinds of additives in their noms, and a lot of it was really, really bad for you. Like, we're talking deadly. Chalk and alum were often added to bread dough to make it whiter, and sometimes pipe clay, plaster of Paris, or sawdust was added to the mix as well. Red lead was sometimes added to cheese, lead was added to cider, mustard, wine, sugars, and candies. Copper sulfates were used in preserving fruits, jams, and wine. Mercury was used in candies, and even ice cream was made using a water and chalk mixture. All of these unsafe ingredients are actually what prompted the food safety industry, because no matter what's going on, you shouldn't be eating lead, chalk, and mercury. At number 3, corpse medicine. Now earlier I mentioned the whole grave robber industry and how that really took off during the Victorian era, but now let's talk about how they used corpses in their medicine. Back then, some people believed that consuming certain parts of the human body could cure their ailments. I know. Gross, right? One of the more popular medicines back then was a mixture made with human skull and chocolate, and it was believed to cure apoplexy. Back in the Victorian era, medical texts were published describing what parts of the human body could be used to treat specific ailments. One text described mixing the skull of a young woman with treacle to treat epilepsy. Another text says that you could treat paralysis with a candle made of human fat. Apparently, executioners were linked to this type of medicine, as they would, execute someone and then use the remains to become a doctor and treat people's illnesses. Imagine Grey's Anatomy, but with Victorian medicine. Sounds like an interesting thing to watch, but also probably not to experience. At number 2, mummies. Speaking of dead people though, people from the Victorian era were oddly fascinated with mummies. I mean, I can understand the fascination to a certain extent because they're old and cool, but of course, these people just had to be extra weird and take that obsession with mummies to heights that they didn't need to be. People used ground up mummies to make paint. Pieces of mummies were sold in jars, and they were even used in advertising. One candy shop put a mummy on display in the store, claiming that it was the daughter of a pharaoh who saved baby Moses. I mean, that's weird, right? I understand that this was all happening as archaeologists were starting to uncover lost treasures and secrets from Egypt, but I mean, a mummy in a candy shop? Seems a little much. And finally, at number 1, baby farmers. Now for what I believe is probably the most disturbing thing from the Victorian era, baby farmers. Basically, this was an industry of women who would take unwanted babies and either take care of them, give them to new parents, or unfortunately have them disposed of. One famous case of the darker side of baby farmers comes from a woman named Amelia Dyer. She was known to have charged women a lot of money to take their babies off their hands, but unfortunately the children wouldn't survive Amelia's care. It is believed that Amelia was responsible for the passings of hundreds of babies, making her one of the biggest monsters of the Victorian era.
Number 10, the hobble skirt. This is a bad idea written all over it. The hobble skirt, also jokingly called the speed limit skirt, was a dress with a very tight hem, making the poor lass who's wearing its movement, well, not having much of it. Can't have the wife running off from her home now, even if that, that meant the home was not a good place and men acted really bad back then. But no, you can't have her running away. Apparently though, some were so tight that it caused women to fall, and in some extreme cases, I can't believe this, those falls were fatal. What? Number 9, muslin dresses. Honestly, I can see celebrities doing this today. Okay, so the female figure. It's sleek, it's curvy, it's gorgeous. Today a girl's got some options on how she wants to flaunt what her mama gave her. You go, girls. But back then, well, not so much. Except for the muslin dress, apparently, which I find strange at the time, since seeing a woman's ankle could give a guy a stiff neck for hours, if you catch my drift. Essentially, this was a dress that you had to wet first, like a gentle misting, if you will. Yeah, weird, right? And then you'd wear it out. Now, for the summertime, this makes sense, and honestly, I might support this myself, actually. See the curves, stay cool. However, some stories tell us of women who wore this during cooler weather and then got sick. Fashion over function, ladies. Be careful. That's a silly one. Oh, 40 below, I better wear my muslin dress. Yes, I'm just gonna walk out. Number 8, ladies wear. Okay, this is a general one, but ladies' dresses and wear in general was just ridiculous. I mean those big poofy dresses, it just seems like ladies had it rough. When have they not? Wear a dress that's too tight or so big you struggle to walk around. Not to mention the fanciest of dresses have wire or wood cages and frames. Just making walking around more difficult because, yeah, that makes sense. For me, anytime I wear formal wear, I keep an eye out for bathrooms. You never know when you need to go. However, I just can't imagine trying to squeeze the lemon in those bad boys. Whew, that would be difficult. To make matters worse, there are stories of women wearing just regular big poopy dresses and then getting in accidents at factories. And yes, it was gruesome. And yes, they didn't make it out. And no, there's no movies about it. Stop asking. Number 7, pestilence fabrics. Last time I was talking about the Victorian era, I mentioned a few points on fabrics with harmful and dangerous chemicals, which happened more than it should have. It shouldn't happen at all, really. It's kind of sad. Well, that wasn't the only fabric-related issue that was out to get you back then. For example, wealthy people couldn't be bothered to do their own laundry. I hate doing laundry, I don't blame you. I'm not wealthy though. And sometimes would have them washed and taken away by launders who, well, wash clothes to the rest of the city. Being that clothes and washers themselves were poor, or that clothes were just mixed around regardless, that was an issue. There was a lot of sickness going around at the time and, well, it was contagious. A lot of times these sicknesses would cling to fabrics and when given back to their customers, well, they could very well come down whatever London was feeling at the time. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I think I'll just wear more of my dirty stuff. I'll just wear my underwear for 6 months straight. It was white when I bought it, not anymore, but it's okay. Number 6, lead. Here we go again. Lead, just lead in general. It was used in so much stuff. Seriously, it's scary. Especially because they knew it was harmful. It wasn't a secret, they knew. I was gonna pick one leaded item, but I couldn't. I mean, seriously, I know this is a list about fashion, but it was involved in some clothes making processes, it was in women's makeup, which that's also fashion, and it was in house paint, which I know that's not technically fashion, but it kinda is. Trust me, I used to mix paint before I was an internet comedian. I know the history of paint. Ask me your paint-related questions in the comments below. I'm the guy you need to talk to. I mean, it was used in pipes too, and we drank out of those. It's just crazy. Now, it is one of those things that minor exposure to is fine, sure, but the thing was with fashion and beauty is that you probably would use said product every day, like the clothing or the makeup, and especially the makeup of the ladies. Lead poisoning symptoms include headaches, stomach pain, constipation, infertility, and memory loss. Yikes, that's not fun. We don't like that here.
Number 5, Matchstick makers. The idea of a lighter wasn't really a big thing back in the Victorian era, obviously. I mean, they definitely existed. The first lighter was invented in 1823, but it wasn't like the ones we have now, not like those Bics that still don't work. It wasn't a portable thing. The first match was invented in 1805, but it kind of sucked, and the first friction-activated match came around much later in 1826. This one here changed the game for good. They were made with white phosphorus, which is, of course, extremely toxic. But they didn't have machines to make these matches. No, it was, of course, done by people, young women. It was only women that had to do this, and in the worst of conditions, of course. And before you ask, no, they didn't understand protective gear. Well, they did a bit, but even so, women didn't get that kind of luxury, right? They didn't get that treatment. These girls would have to eat their lunch at their workstations, meaning they would probably end up ingesting said white phosphorus the entire shift. History is horrible. Number 4. Resurrectionalist. Alright, back in the day, medical schools who wished to study the human body only really had access to the bodies of criminals who had hit the end of their line, right? You're not gonna go dig up someone's wife and be like, hey, mind if I study her? He's like, no, please. There actually weren't too many of these bodies around to begin with, which led to a good price for bodies that were in, well, reasonably good condition to, study up close, other than being, deceased and disgusting. This wasn't exactly the greatest idea, sure, I'll admit that. Now you've probably created an opportunity for people with no morals or empathy to go and dig up fresh graves. And that's exactly what happened. People would become their own resurrectionalist. It's a cool name for a god-awful profession, if you want to call it that. The problem was so bad that people had to protect, they had to guard the graves of their recently deceased loved ones, or else these guys would come in and try and dig them up and sell your nana for like 20 bucks. You have to stay there for 4 nights and guard her. That's crazy. No one should have to do that. The Victorian era sucked. No one should have to do that, or this next one here. Number 3, train engine cleaner. Yeah, this one's gonna suck. It sounds yucky already. For this job, you were required to get into, of course, pretty tough positions to, well, clean the engine of a train. Train engine cleaners would have to get inside a small hole in the engine of a train and shovel out all that coal that was left over. Yeah, as if shoveling the coal in wasn't bad enough, now some guy's gotta crawl under and shovel it all out. Nope. They go underneath the train with a dusty ash pan and they work away all day long and nights. These guys would spend their days shoveling 5 to 6 tons of coal into the furnace of the steam trains and then spend their nights climbing into the same furnace to clean it out. Every time I watch the Polar Express, it's always so magical, it's always a great time. But even on the Polar Express, there's a guy shoveling coal all night long on Christmas Eve. You know what I mean? That's how bad this job is. Magic can't even save it. Couldn't even picture a worse job to have with this goofy back. Imagine that. Imagine me doing this all day. No way. I'm gonna make it 1 week. Number 2, funeral mute. Ah yes, death. Happened quite a lot back then. I thought being a pallbearer had a lot of pressure, don't drop them, all that kind of stuff. Victorian London saw many, many funeral mutes. Now Oliver Twist, one of the lousy jobs in that tale, was that of a funeral mute. Oliver Twist is like, this one sucks. Well, it really sucks. Mutes were required to dress, of course, in all black with a sash while carrying a long cloth covered stick, and your job would be to stand and mourn and not say a thing the entire time. You'd have to stand at the door of the recently deceased home and just welcome death. Just embrace it. You have to be death. The mascot for death is now you. Horrible. In Victorian London too, you're gonna breathe in a fresh rotting body. Nice, that's good. I have about 4 days left, thank you. And after that point, you would lead the coffin all the way to the graveyard. Nice and slow, like you were leading a marching band. Only it's not music, it's death behind you. And finally, number 1, a chimney sweep. I remember doing this when I was a kid. Okay, I got some questions now. I'm gonna make some phone calls after this list. I had to do this when I was a kid, but back then it was a lot worse. It wasn't a chore, it was an actual job. This was a terrible job to have in Victorian London, obviously. Chimney sweeps were famously young men, guys. I can't say anything else here, but they were young lads. That's it. History is pretty horrible, right? You could fill it in. 1840 was a good year, all things considered, because a law was passed that made it officially illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to climb in and clean a chimney. Nice. I was 18 cleaning my chimney at home. I had no idea. I could have busted out this law and been like, actually, 3 more years, Dad. See ya. Just moonwalk out of there. I'm not cleaning anything. Just the kitchen for now. I'm not using that tiny little brush. Why do all chimney sweeps have a tiny brush? Give them a bigger brush,
Number 10 on the countdown is the cat's meat man or woman. We all know that the Egyptians worship cats, as many cultures do. But did you know that the cat overpopulation in the 1800s London area created a job called cat meat sellers? Always one of the most popular street sellers of the 1800s. If you think they sold cat meat, you're entirely wrong. Don't worry. These vendors were actually selling meat to cats themselves. Primarily horse, it was said that 26,000 horses that were maimed or past their workability were slaughtered a year for London's reportedly 300,000 street cats that were existing in the 1860s. When the cat's meat cellar appeared, feline owners were encouraged by their cat's mewing to bestow upon their favorite pet a delectable treat for a mere half penny. You may be wondering how this could be one of the worst jobs to have. Well, pushing around a hot stinking cart of horse meat has its cons, such as disease and rot. Depending on where you sold, you could be making a fortune, or you could be barely scraping by. The hungry and homeless would often follow, harass, and sometimes burglarize cat meat sellers for meat or money. Also, their stalking behavior did scare off clientele or drew more complaints from the commoners. Personally, I couldn't think of something cuter than a little trolley going around town delivering food to kittens. Prepare to go downhill, however, because this next job is a lot less lighthearted than cat meat delivery. At number 9 in our countdown is the resurrectionists. Money was tight for many, as I had mentioned, but how low are you willing to go as a person to get what you need? Well, if you're willing to dig up somebody's grandma, it could put hundreds in your coin purse. In the early 19th century, the only cadavers available to medical schools and anatomists were that of executed criminals. It was also mandatory for medical students to do an autopsy to graduate, and they had to source their own body. This demand for bodies was often unmet, resulting in medical schools and their students offering extreme amounts of money for the delivery of a fresh body. Thus, resurrectionists are born. Sneaking into cemeteries at night, they would prowl around for a fresh grave site and then dig up the recently deceased. However, bodies could only be sold if they were within a certain time period of freshness, and as grave robbing became more common, many family members of the recently deceased would take turns standing guard for nights in a row to ensure that the body lay undisturbed until it was considered unsalvageable for cash. In 1832, the Anatomy Act was imposed due to the actions of William Burke and William Hare, who are believed to have murdered 16 people between 1827 and 1828, just 1 year, all to sell to the University of Edinburgh. This act did give doctors and anatomists greater access to cadavers and allowed people to leave their bodies to medical science, overall helping end the resurrectionists era. While sourcing the dead may make for a fat paycheck, I think this is a profession nobody should attempt to resurrect. Speaking of the dead, have you ever considered eating off their lap? Okay, well, not quite literally off their lap, but number 8 on the countdown is sin eaters. Sin eating is a job that really only affects you if you have a discomfort with death or religious/spiritual. It was believed that when someone religious was to die after a life led of sins, such as gluttony, lust, pride, or crimes and cruelty towards others, their family would sometimes feel that the only way to guarantee their loved ones access to heaven is through someone living taking on the weight of their sins. While the act is against the church's wishes, sin eaters go back as far as the 17th century. Depending on the family or the deceased, the meal served may be specific, but traditionally it was just a piece of bread. Placed on the chest of the laid out body, it was believed to supposedly suck up the sins of the dead, clearing them for a passage to heaven. Once the sins had been captured in the bread, the sin eater would sit on a stool facing the door and eat the bread before washing the bread down with a bowl of ale. Because he was a man who would willingly take on the sins of other people, he was often solitary in the community. However, sin eaters fetched a pretty fair price for the act. I mean, if it is true that you're taking on someone else's bad karma, you'd at least want to be compensated for that, right? Sin eating remained popular in England and Wales all the way to the turn of the 20th century, when England's last sin eater, Richard Munslow, died in Rattling Hope in 1906. Like sin eaters, our next job was one of public scrutiny and rejection. Number 7 is mudlarking. Victorian mudlarks are the original foragers of the foreshore. They would be scavenging for anything on exposed riverbed which they could sell in order to survive. This was the last ditch resort. People would hike up trousers and wade their feet around in sludge, feeling with toes as well as fingers for items that may be lost or discarded in the mud. All ages participated in this activity. However, it was usually those who were the most affected by poverty that were taking part. As a result, those seen mudlarking were considered shameful and the lowest of society. River Thames was the most famous for mudlarking in the Victorian era, as it was a renowned dumping ground that saw endless amounts of product travel through it. It was also a highly impoverished area, which made the desperation to make money all the more grand, filling their water banks with the poor. Mudlarking actually isn't out of practice nowadays, but it has changed significantly. Nowadays it can be a fun group or solo activity that on occasion does require a permit. You can join mudlarking groups or do tours while traveling. It seems that sifting through garbage was an unfortunate trend in the Victorian era, as toshers make number 6 in our countdown. Toshers, a fun word to say, the job, not so much. Unlike mudlarking, which was in the riverbeds, these workers went underground for their winnings. The Victorian era saw the development of sewer systems, and the poor saw opportunity in them. Toshers descended into the sewers to sift through raw sewage and find any valuable that may have fallen down the drains. It was extremely
extremely dangerous work, as noxious gas fumes formed deadly airless pockets, and since sewers were newer, the tunnels frequently crumbled from inefficient building. There were swarms of rats that had little fear of humans, and at any moment the sluices might just open for a fresh wave of filthy water and feces to come crashing through. After 1840, it did become illegal to enter the sewers without permission. Rather than abandon the trade, toshers began working late at night or early in the morning to avoid detection. It may have been a stinky job, but it was also one of the most profitable on our list today. I guess you'd go nose blind after a little bit. Right? Hopefully. On a warm summer day, the last thing you want after jumping into the lake on your cabin trip is to emerge covered in leeches. However, in the Victorian era, that would be a prime location for the leech collectors.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the London Burkers. This is the name used to refer to a notorious of body snatchers who operated in London in the early 19th century. They were involved in the illegal trade of selling corpses to medical schools for dissection and study, and they would often resort to killings to obtain the bodies. The most infamous member of the gang was William Burke, who, along with his partner William Hare, committed a series of killings in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1828. They sold the corpses to the anatomist Robert Knox, who was unaware of their methods. Two of the group's members, John Bishop and Thomas Williams, were convicted of killings and sentenced to death. The London Burker scandal highlighted the demand for fresh corpses for medical research and contributed to the passage of the Anatomy Act of 1832, which allowed for the legal procurement of corpses for medical purposes. Emphasis on the legal part of that, though. It's important. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Great Stink of London. The Great Stink of London was an environmental disaster that occurred in the summer of 1858. It was caused by the city's inadequate sewage system, which allowed raw sewage and waste to be dumped directly into the River Thames. The hot weather only exacerbated the problem, which is disgusting, and it caused the sewage to ferment and emit a foul odor that permeated the city. The smell was so overwhelming that it caused widespread illness and forced many people to flee the city. Parliament was forced to act, and a major engineering project was launched to build a modern sewage system for London. This project was led by engineer Joseph Bazalgette, who designed a system of sewers and pumping stations that would carry sewage out of the city and into the Thames estuary. The construction of the new sewage system was a massive undertaking, involving the excavation of miles of tunnels and the construction of large pumping stations. It took several years to complete, but once it was finished, it greatly improved the health and hygiene of the city. The Great Stink was a turning point in the history of public health, and it helped to spur major improvements in sanitation and public health infrastructure across the developed world. Today, the legacy of the Great Stink lives on in the modern sewer systems and wastewater treatment facilities that are really essential for maintaining public health and environmental quality. In our number 3 spot today, we have Typhoid Mary. The Typhoid Mary case is a famous incident in the history of public health in the United States. Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary, was an asymptomatic carrier of the bacteria that causes typhoid fever, a potentially fatal disease. Despite being unaware of her condition, Mary inadvertently infected numerous people during her work as a cook in New York City in the early 1900s. After a number of typhoid outbreaks were traced back to Mary's cooking, she was tracked down and forcibly quarantined for several years. The case generated significant controversy at the time, with some arguing that Mary's civil rights had been violated and others maintaining that public safety justified her isolation. The Typhoid Mary case remains significant for its implications for public health policy and for the balance between individual rights and public safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Birmingham riots. These riots took place in 1839, and they were a series of violent clashes that occurred in the city of Birmingham, England. The riots were sparked by tensions between two groups: the Chartists, who were calling for political reform and greater democratic representation, and the authorities who opposed the movement. On July 4th, 1839, a group of Chartists held a rally in Birmingham's Bull Ring, where they were met with opposition from local government agencies. The situation quickly escalated into violence, with protesters and authorities engaging in brutal clashes that lasted for several days. The Birmingham riots of 1839 were significant for their role in the history of the Chartist movement, and it is said that the events of 1839 demonstrated the lengths to which authorities were willing to go to suppress the movement. And finally, in our our number 1 spot today, we have the brown dog affair. This was a controversy that arose in the early 20th century in London over the use of animals in medical research. In 1903, a statue of a brown dog was erected in Battersea, which had been used in vivisection experiments by a scientist named William Bayliss. If you're unfamiliar, vivisection is defined as, quote, the practice of performing operations on live animals for the purpose of experimentation or scientific research. While I am all for the advancement of science, I do believe in ethical studies, and this clearly was not that. The statue was intended as a memorial to the countless animals that had been used in medical research, but it was met with outrage from some people. Anti-vivisection groups saw it as a symbol of animal cruelty, while some medical researchers saw it as an attack on their work. In 1907, a group of medical students attacked the statue during a protest, sparking a violent confrontation with anti-vivisection activists. The statue was eventually removed by authorities, but the controversy continued to rage on for many years. The brown dog affair highlighted the deep divisions in society over the use of animals in medical research and contributed to the development of new laws and regulations aimed at protecting animal welfare. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!
At number 10, death photography. Has anyone out there looked at really old photos and had that eerie thought that everyone in that photo is dead now? I have. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's just something that comes to mind sometimes. Back in the Victorian era though, they really had that thought because death photography became a trend at the time. Back then, people were dropping like flies. They dealt with a lot of illnesses like measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, rubella, typhus, and cholera. Death was all around them, but with the rise of photography, this became a new way of keeping a memento of their loved one who passed away. Before this, they would keep locks of hair and other items from their loved ones, but once they got access to cameras, families started posing with their dead relatives. Literally. Families would often keep the bodies of their dead loved one in the house for days after their passing in order to have that mourning period, but soon they started staging photo shoots with the remains of their relatives, posing them and dressing them up to make it look like they're still alive. Family members would take pictures with the deceased to have one last family portrait before burying their loved one. It's kind of heartwarming in a way, but also really creepy. At number 9, emigration. During the Victorian era, there was unfortunately a lot of orphan children living in the streets of London. It became a pretty big problem because of the sheer amount of young people without homes or families. It was estimated that around 30,000 children were living on the streets in London in 1869. Soon a program was put into place to try and solve this issue, and people started rounding up these orphan kids and shipping them off elsewhere to work in some of the British colonies. Many of the kids who were shipped off ended up working as farmhands or as domestic servants. Though many children were shipped off to places like New Zealand and Australia, the majority of them went to Canada. About 80,000 of them actually. They were sent away with hopes that they would be able to live better lives, but unfortunately for many of those kids, they didn't end up having any better luck in compared to when they lived on the streets. This practice ended up becoming pretty controversial, as you can imagine. Before we carry on talking about the strange things that happened in the Victorian era, why not take a moment to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, mental health. Back in the Victorian era, the study of the human brain and psyche was still relatively new, so no one really knew what was going on up in people's noggins. Mental asylums started to pop up, and people started getting diagnosed with mental problems even if the diagnosis wasn't accurate. The 3 labels that a patient could fall under were the manic, the melancholic, and those with dementia. The symptoms for those big 3 labels often varied, and people were admitted to asylums for some pretty messed up reasons. There was a list of common causes for mental illness that people referred to back then, and it included things like, quote, laziness, novel reading, superstition, an immoral life, and intemperance, as well as the act of self-pleasuring. For women, they could also be sent to asylums for some pretty ridiculous reasons, like imaginary female trouble, hysteria, rumor of husband murder, and even fits of desertion of husband. I am so glad things have changed since then. At number 7, grave robber. When you think of jobs back in the Victorian era, you might think of things like chimney sweeps and lawyers. But another relatively popular, though questionable, profession was being a grave robber. Yes, people actually made a living off robbing graves. As people studied medicine, they needed cadavers to practice on, but there was a law saying that only the bodies of those who had been executed for a crime could be used as a cadaver, and since the laws changed to include less and less crimes having death penalties, soon people started running out of cadavers to practice on, and this gave way to the boom in the grave robbing industry. People could make a pretty penny for snatching bodies from cemeteries and selling them to medical professionals and students. Fresher bodies went for more money, and the grave robbers not only made money off the sale of the cadaver, but they also charged a fee, so they ended up with a little extra cash in their pockets. Eventually, the grave robbing business became such a big problem that cemeteries started installing watchtowers and guards to prevent people from getting away with the dead. At number 6, beauty. I've talked about this before in some past videos, but the Victorian era was famous for its strange beauty practices, so I just had to include it on this list. You're probably familiar with the makeup from the Victorian era. Women often painted their faces white to look as pale as possible, but even though they believed it made them look beautiful, it also did a lot of harm to their health. The white face paint that women would use was lead based, and as we all by now, lead makes you dead. But this white lead paint isn't the only thing that harmed people's skin. Women would also wash their faces with ammonia to make their skin look paler. At night, women would rub opium on their faces, and if they were really dedicated to their beauty regime, they would also ingest arsenic. They were literally poisoning themselves in the name of beauty. Women would also use mercury on their eyebrows and eyelashes, and would use lemon juice or belladonna in their eyes, which could cause blindness in some people. Once again, I'm glad things have changed.
Number 5. Harriet Boozewell. Christmas morning 1872 was a good morning for everyone waking up except Harriet Boozewell, who was found carved up like a Christmas goose. Oh god. The night before, she had attended a fancy Christmas ball, as you do back then, and she was seen leaving with a well-dressed, handsome man, a foreigner, most likely German, as witnesses report. She was found the next day with multiple lacerations, and yeah, it wasn't pretty. The police eventually followed a trail of evidence to a German man in South America, but because of the man's pleasant demeanor and solid alibi, he was dropped as a suspect, even though his maid claims of cleaning a bloody handkerchief that night of her passing. No one else was ever arrested for the crime, and that was the end of that one. Oh yeah, the bloody handkerchief? Yeah, that was my brother. I had nothing to do with that. Yeah, it was not me, sorry. Number 4, Elizabeth Jackson. Surprise, surprise! Another mangled corpse was found in the River Thames. That's weird. This time, the lower half of a woman and legs. As the days went on, more and more parts were discovered, and after another bad glue and paste project, it was identified to be Elizabeth Jackson, a young woman who had left her home in shame of an unwedded pregnancy. Ooh, scandalous. Sadly, she ended up in River Thames, and no one is sure who did it at all. Some claim actually it was Jack the Ripper, and while it does make sense, experts don't all agree. Thus, it is another unsolved mystery. God, why is it happening so much back then? What the hell's going on? God. Number 3, Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. That's a nice nurse. What a nice thing to say about a nice young lady. Maybe one of the most famous crimes ever, actually. In a nutshell, it looked like Lizzie had done it. It was a closed and shut case. It seemed like a pretty concrete open and shut case, but yet again, somehow, she got off free. She claimed that she was in the barn when it happened, and then she discovered the bodies. Now, most of the topics on this list are a whodunit, but I mean, for sure this one, we can't be so serious to not ignore the facts here, right? I mean, she was the only person there. Who could have done it? Well, unsolved, apparently. Oh god, alright, she didn't do it. Number 2, the West Ham vanishings. Just east of London between the years of 1882 and 1899, a few women disappeared and they were left in parks, or at least their bodies were. I don't know why that keeps happening. It's 1800s is weird. And while we don't know very much about Jack the Ripper, we know even less about these cases, as they've somewhat fallen into obscurity. Naturally, police thought it could be Jack the Ripper again, but it's also likely that it's not. I'm starting to think Victorian London isn't the safest place for a lady to be. I don't like this is going. That's all the information on that one. It was like, yeah, they died, we don't know who did it. Oh, okay. Alright. I'll put that in. Number 1, Carrie Brown. This one takes place in 1881 Manhattan. Carrie Brown was found deceased in a hotel room. A man named Amir Abi was arrested and spent 11 years in jail for the crime, before being proven innocent and released. So what's so crazy about this whole thing? Well, given the same style, the running theory was that, again, this was Jack the Ripper. even though this was New York and not London. So the question is really, who did carry in? And if it was Jack the Ripper, why is he in New York, and how many more did he really commit in London and New York? Man, that's scary, dude. I don't know.
Let's start off with a title that describes the Victorians in of itself: melodrama. The Victorian era culture wasn't actually the whole fair ye black death blah blah vibe entirely. It was more like the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies, where it's dark and gritty and the people are obsessed with death and corruption of religion and occult stuff. The word melodrama, literally meaning music drama or song drama, derives from Greek but reached the Victorian theatre by way of the French, who had adopted the interest during the Revolutionary period. In Britain, melodrama became the most popular kind of theatrical entertainment for most of the 18th and 19th century, a period wherein more people went out to the theater than any other time in history. Melodrama's unprecedented popularity during the Victorian period owes its life to the diverse audience it could draw, working class to aristocratic, but it also the illegitimate theaters that had been forbidden by law to perform drama involving spoken word. Many melodramas were book renditions or artisanal written and often featuring gore or death, and remained popular until the end of the 19th century. Looking for a less noisy affair, more somewhere to chat but also be entertained? Why, how about the music halls? Even more popular for their variety of singing, contortionists, illusionists, animal tamers, trick cyclists, ballet girls, and more. These emerged in the 1850s, and by the 1870s there were hundreds across Britain. The audiences chatted throughout the acts, and they could be unruly, throwing things at performers like bottles, old boots, vegetables, and even dead cats. In some halls, bottles carried by waiters were chained to the trays, and the orchestra was protected from flying objects by steel grills. While women initially weren't allowed in the middle-class song and supper rooms, they were later encouraged to attend because people hoped that they would have a civilizing influence on the men. Who thought that? That's not why women wanted to go. Anywho, throughout the 1860s, it became more common for women to perform in music halls themselves. Many married into aristocracy because of it, got hired on to big performers and went touring, or ended up modeling for magazines. Through topical songs, music halls played the political edge and kept their audiences informed and educated about their rights and about the current social, economic, and political issues or corruptions. The last 2 decades of the 19th century saw steady efforts to control and regulate music halls, with music regulation, performer regulation, enforcement measures to reduce alcohol and worker girls, and slowly introducing higher paying audience. And since I mentioned alcohol, the Victorian era was one of mixology. Many of the cocktails we drink now we owe to the British advent, and mixology historians consider the time of the mid-1800s to Prohibition to be the golden age of mixology. Cocktail bars today use recipes and techniques that derive or replicate what the Victorians used in mix. The term cocktail began to be used in the very late 1700s, with the first workable definition printed in 1806. The popular mixed drinks of the time were punches and warm spice drinks served in large quantities rather than individually prepared drinks. Industrialization and changing societal norms came the rise of the cocktail because more available ingredients, the availability of ice, and the societal change seeing men and women, working class aristocratic, socializing together in public. So emerged career bartenders. One of the first people to make a name for himself was the hotshot bartender Jerry Thomas. He's so responsible for creating the trend, he's considered the father of American mixology. In fact, there was a gin craze of the 18th century, and it highlights the Brits' love of cocktails. The consumption of gin in Great Britain, especially London, was so high Parliament passed 5 major acts in 1729, 36, 43, 47, and 51 designed to control the consumption of gin. Whether at home, the music halls, or the dirty, smoggy streets, the Brits loved a good novel. Print culture in Victorian era was diverse, aided by relatively high literacy rates. There were hundreds of magazines and newspapers available at cheaper prices, so even the most lowly and humble could enjoy some writing, even if it was subpar entry-level crap. The 1880s saw the emergence of the new journalism, which drew in readers with pieces of violent crimes and scandals in high society, aka the true crime podcast of the times. Then novels were a key feature of the Victorian print culture. By mid-century, Britons of all classes could afford and read novels. Some were aimed at the highly educated and well-off people, others at less educated readers looking for appealing and exciting stories. Penny dreadfuls and sensation novels, seen at their best in the work of Wilkie Collins, thrilled their readers, and Victorian novels were often long with complicated plots and many characters. Many of those by Charles Dickens are still read today, and the Penny Dreadfuls made it to the TV screen in the masterful 3-season TV drama. You guys should check it out. And where better to read my newest Mary Shelley horror than my asbestos-painted office filled with taxidermy. The Georgian era was one of rationalism, but a shift in ideology took place as this period transitioned into the Victorians. Their view aligned more so with the Romantics, who were intrigued by mysticism and death. So, while they were a time of technological advancement and progress, culturally Victorians were prone to bizarre habits and beliefs. Like when a human family member passed away, Victorians did an extensive mourning ceremony, like take pictures with the dead, sometimes wear black for years, sob and roll on the ground. So, when a family pet passed away, it's not that much different, and it's common to hire a taxidermist to preserve the animal, giving them a second life, which reflects the Victorian belief that animals should be useful to humans even in death. Walter Potter was a celebrated celebrity English taxidermist, known for his dioramas of animals mimicking real-life situations. Also famously known for not being an ass who killed his animals to create art, but rather receiving donations from local farmers to do so. In 1861, Potter opened his own museum to showcase his creations, and it remained popular until the early 19th century when people began raising questions about how ethical taxidermy was.
Number 5. Corsets. Nobody wants a waist bigger than 9 inches, said everybody in Victorian times. I for one can appreciate the female form and the hourglass figure. It's admirable, sure, but that being said, I don't think we need to go so far to keep the female form in shape. The corset's a little too much. Corsets were those chest-tightening, gut-sunking, push-all to mincemeat to the top of the pie apparel that went under every woman's dress or every fat dude in his 50s who wants to feel 29 again. I don't think I have to tell you why this is bad or uncomfortable. The human chest needs to breathe, and when something's that tight around you, well, you struggle to breathe. Trouble breathing, fainting were not all too rare, especially in hot and humid climates. For my generation, you may recall Elizabeth Swann had issue with hers in Pirates of the Caribbean. And then she fell, and then Jack Sparrow caught her, and it was a good movie. But the corsets, I can't get behind them. Number 4. Foot binding. While not exclusively done in the Victorian era, it was started in ancient times and continued all the way up until the 20th century, thus includes the Victorian era. A Chinese fashion tradition that takes women's feet and binds them and squeezes them until they begin to change shape. Poor ladies. Again, I don't think I need to tell you that forcibly changing bone and muscle structure in your feet just for fashion is a bad idea. I think you all know that. For starters, it doesn't look right. After years of binding, the shape of the foot drastically changes. Secondly, the health risk of doing such is not worth it. Oftentimes toenails fall off or become infected. Ugh, gross. Bones break and pierce skin. It's a bad time all around. Thank God we stopped doing that, right? Jeez. Oh, thanks. Number 3. Lard wigs. Wigs have been around for a long time. If you're a fancy politician from Washington, you wear a powdered wig, singing Yankee Doodle Dandy all the way to the Capitol building. Balding men, women, or really anyone can wear a wig. It's really for everyone. What I'm getting at is it's been around for a long time and we've come a long way. Given enough time and asked to tell the difference, I probably couldn't. I really couldn't point out a wig if you showed me. So we're getting really good at it these days. That being said, in the Victorian times, wigs were quite common and were fashioned with a peculiar substance. Lard, yes. Imagine every day of the week without proper baths or showers and living in close proximity to the Thames River. And you take a handful of pig lard and just slather that in your wig to style it. Put a gross sound effect in there, just gross sound, ugh. Do you imagine the smell? This is the most offensive hair crime since frosted tips in the early 2000s. Those were a big mistake too, I gotta say. I had them, but there's only one man who can pull that off. And he's in Flavortown, you know what I'm talking about. Number 2, German helmets. 1914 was the end of the Victorian era and the beginning of the modern era. It's actually a very fascinating time. It's kind of like modern meeting the past. Really cool. Well, fashion just doesn't mean civilian. Anyone who's ever spent time in the Marine Corps knows that they gotta look their best. Wow, Marines. The Empire of Germany was no different in 1914, and a lot of German soldiers wore helmets with an ornamental spike, like a Koopa from Super Mario. I know you guys have seen the movies, you've seen them. Except the main issue here wasn't an overweight Italian plumbers jumping on their heads, but the war and the enemy itself. World War I was fought in a lot of trenches, so it's kind of awkward when you can see a bunch of little spikes moving up and around the enemy's trench. It's also kind of dangerous to have an extra piece on your helmet, as you can get caught in weird places like barbed wire, and yes, if you're wondering, sometimes they were used in the absence of a good melee tool. Yeah, you'd be correct. Sometimes they did. You gotta do what you gotta do. Oh, brutal. Number 1, French uniforms. More World War I, but it's still Victorian. It counts, I promise. While the spiked helmets were a very bad idea, they were shortly phased out. They learned their lesson. However, the French stood up and said, no, I have a worse idea. Also, shout out to France. You guys get a bad rap for the war, but it's really your war. You guys rocked it, man. You guys are the best. Love France. Anyway, the French uniforms were a little bit of a mistake. In a classic case of fashion over function, kind of the theme of this list, they wore very bright and blue-red uniforms. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but bright blue doesn't exactly blend into an environment, thus it made French soldiers a very easy target. Everything's like gray, black, and brown, and you're just wearing bright blue and red pants? Yeah, you're not gonna make it far, Chief. Number 10, Boy Jones. What's more intimate than a stalker? Am I right, ladies? If there's one thing women have loved throughout history, it's having every second of their privacy being watched by some creepy man, right? No. I can only imagine it's been worse since the dawn of smartphones and social media. That must be horrible. Well, as it turns out, there were some real creepwads in the Victorian era too. The Boy Jones was a stalker of Queen Victoria who on multiple occasions snuck his way into Buckingham Palace, one time escaping with a pair of the Queen's underwear. What? Arrested multiple times but still somehow found his way back to the palace. But what they should have done was swap the Queen's underwear for a pair of mine after a shift in the garden center I used to work at. Oh yeah, nobody's coming for you after sniffing those bad boys. Oh! Number 9, graceful words. This was a time when ladies were supposed to be ladies, and that means manners are on the table and elbows are off. Dresses were worn to not show ankles, God forbid an ankle or wrist bust out. I think more importantly, however, or rather unusual that is that women were expected to talk a certain way. Good evening, Mr. Burrows. You must excuse my tardiness. There was a dreadful man screaming at me because my ankles were shown whilst mounting my carriage. Your what was showing, love? Oh, you heard that? I can't believe it. Excuse me. I must be someone else. I don't need to tell you guys how ridiculous that is. I say fly out the handle, ladies. Wear what you want, do what you want. Number 8, shots. Not the kind I like. Well, I don't know about you guys, but nothing ruins the mood for me and my lady like being fired upon. Yikes. I'd like to stay the night, kid, but the automatic gunfire coming from outside is starting to get to me. See? All gangster impressions aside, things must have been that way for poor Queen Victoria as she was shot in her carriage in 1840. A young man fired 2 shots at her carriage. More attacks would actually follow in the coming years. It's kind of hard to feel that certain kind of way after bullets go grazing past your pretty face. The worst thing that ever happened to my generation was making sure nobody was home when you were studying with your boyfriend. I was too busy playing Call of Duty, but at least I never got actually shot at. You know what I mean? That's just a good thing. Number 7, expectations. Alright, this one goes out to all the married ladies in the audience. Hello, how are you? I'm doing great, thanks for asking. I'm curious as to why you got married and what your expectations were. Did you marry your high school sweetheart and live happily ever after? Maybe you had a shotgun wedding and after one night at the saloon. Maybe you just really wanted to find a nice man and settle down, start a family, be a mother. I think any of those options are great, so as long as you have options. In Victorian England, you were expected to do the latter. Women were expected to get married and have kids, and that's about it really. My question is, why were ankles and wrists an issue but giving birth isn't? What I mean is it's kind of a compromising position to be in. All I'm asking is that the girls get treated fairly and given choices and be allowed to show some ankle. Doesn't make any sense. You can look at her business down there but you can't show an ankle? That doesn't make any sense. I'm a magician. Number 6, double standard. Divorce sucks. It's no fun. The person you once loved and cherished is now the villain in your story. I love McDonald's and I don't ever want them to be the villain in my story. I love you guys. Gotta get those Happy Meals. Divorce is something that isn't new. Honestly, it was probably invented the second after marriage was. In Victorian times, men had the right to divorce their wife if they had committed adultery. Women could not. Well, if you refer to my last part, you know that men were doing more than a little window shopping when it came to women. When men left town for business, they would have hired the services of a woman who patrol the streets at night. No, I'm not talking about Batwoman either. So men can divorce women if they dare to do what they did on a regular basis. Yeah, that's totally fair. That's good. Equal. Absolutely. Yeah.
Which are coming in at number 5 on our worst jobs countdown. Leeches are nowadays seen as little more than slimy and creepy creatures, but believe it or not, they used to be a valuable commodity in the fields of beauty and medicines. This job was often fulfilled by poor women living in the country and farmland regions. Wearing shorts or hefting up their long skirt, these women would wade into dirty ponds and waterbeds alike with exposed legs so as to tempt the leeches. When enough leeches were attached to them, the women would climb back out of the pool and scrape the bloodsuckers into metal pots and bowls. Seeing as leeches can survive up to a year without food or in their natural environment, this wasn't always a profitable trade unless you could find someone in dire or consistent need of leeches. Doctors did use leeches to aid in the curing process of all sorts of conditions, ranging from a stomach ache to joint pain to female hysteria, if you know what I'm talking about. Despite being used in medicine, leech collection posed major threats of deadly diseases and blood loss to their collectors. Suffice to say, I don't think I have any interest in going to a doctor's office if I'm going to be prescribed a leeching. Being given the duty of helping prevent and stop the spread of disease in your community would be an incredibly high honor, but maybe wait to sign that job contract until you hear the details. Nightmen definitely make it into our worst jobs countdown, taking the place at number 4. These men would wander the streets at night working what may be one of the most revolting jobs imaginable, collecting human feces off the street for proper disposal. They would dig up the feces from chamber pots, street wells, ditches, sewer holes, you name it. By the time the sun would begin to rise, the carts would be full of the city's excrement, which would then be carried off and reused as fertilizers for the crop that they later consumed. Yummy. Part of being one of the only people up at night means you're a valuable set of eyes. There are reports of nightmen catching burglars, or SA, in the act, or being called to bloody scenes by members of the public to provide alibis. There's also hundreds of cases where nightmen are the ones to find bodies of those who had met their ends out on the street. After long, solitary nights of collecting feces and seeing these crimes unfold, a nightman would collect his 23 shillings, which is $75 today, at the end of the week, and go home to rest before starting it all over again. Since we're already discussing dung, let's get this next one out of the way because it somehow may genuinely be a little bit worse than the last. At number 3, this is the pure finders. Please do not be deceived by the name because this job is anything but pure. In the Victorian era, tanners, who are leather workers, would use dog dung in their practice. Referred to as pure for how it purified the leather and ensured its soft flexibility, dog dung became a hot commodity due to the Victorian demand for leather. Leather was being used for just about anything as it was the hottest trend of this era. It was also being used for things like tack for horses and the necessary creation of shoes and books. To meet demands, tanners needed more dog dung, and so pure finding became a career. These finders would go deep into the cities and their sewers, trying to find where stray dog packs amassed so they could score the biggest load. Whenever dung was found, it'd be retrieved and placed into a covered bucket that would later be sold to a tanner. To make it a little worse for you guys, only some collectors wore a glove to protect their dung handling hand. But others considered it harder to keep a glove clean than a hand, and they opted out of the protection altogether. Yeah, think about that one. I feel like if this next job didn't exist, then maybe we wouldn't have needed the cat meat sellers from our first point in the countdown. Considered one of the most disease-riddled jobs of the Victorian era, it's rat catchers coming in second on our list today. The government was smart. It knew its people were suffering and that many were starving and struggling to make ends meet. So they issued a statement willing to pay people to deal with the rat infestations. Every rat would earn people a little extra cash. If someone could catch more than 5,000 rats in a year, they'd earn special privileges. While 5,000 sounds like it would be a lot, it's essentially 13 per day, and it only takes 21 to 23 days for a rat to give birth to its litter. I think you can do the math. It's said that the government's encouragement of rat catching in this time was the stepping stones towards more plague and diseases to come, as desperate poverty-driven people made poor attempts to catch these rats and caught the illnesses from them. Others cheated the rules. Some people actually intentionally bred rat colonies to supplement their captured rodents. Rat catching became such a lucrative business that gangs formed around it, and murders even took place when the cheaters were discovered or if somebody infiltrated somebody else's ratting territory. Between the venomous competition and high risk of disease resulting in death, it's safe to say that rat catching may have been one of the worst jobs. And now, what may be the worst of the worst for number 1 slot. Let's learn about the history of matchmakers. No, this isn't the romantic kind of matchmaking, unfortunately, but it's rather the business of matches itself. Working what was often a 14-hour shift, matchmakers were predominantly women who were immigrants, living in poverty, widowed, just overall in a bad situation for an era where women had pretty much zero rights. They were compensated poorly, often sexually harassed or assaulted by their management, and even forced to pay fines to their workplace should they be tardy or damage anything they worked on. Working with white phosphorus, the material found in the tip of the match to enable the instant strike anywhere effect, was highly toxic and responsible for a devastating disease known as phossy jaw. This nickname was given by the matchmakers to the particularly nasty condition that would cause the jawbone to rot and become disfigured. Eventually, this infection would spread to the brain and cause debilitating symptoms and extreme pain prior to death. Should the jawbone be removed in time, some women were able to survive longer with the condition, but nothing was guaranteed once phossy jaw had set in. Famously, an article written by a matchstick girl named Annie Besant exposed the conditions of matchstick companies in London. Infuriated, the factory owners fired her and attempted to force signatures of their other staff, stating that they were happy with their working lives. Refusing to do so, by the end of the day, 1,400 women had gone out on strike. Their demands were eventually met, but only 20 years later. It wasn't until 1906 that white phosphorus was made illegal in the use of matchsticks in the UK. The matchstick girls were a revolutionary step towards the deliverance of women's right and autonomy, a journey that we're still on today.